I once met this dude named Matt when I was out with friends at a bar one summer. I was out with a big group, and Matt and I made friends at the bar, vibing over the Cubs game that was on. My group kind of dispersed away from me as I spoke with Matt, so it wasn't like Matt really spoke to any of my friends. We ended up exchanging Instagrams, and he had a decent amount of followers on Instagram, and his pictures made him seem like a normal 20-something-year-old dude who likes to go out, travel, and stay active. After we exchanged info, I went to go find my group. Honestly, whenever you bro out with another guy while you're at a bar, the odds of ever actually contacting each other again after exchanging info are slim to none. You always act like you'll hit them up, but come the next day when you're sober, you just have no interest. Well, the next day, which was a Saturday, I went out to another bar/restaurant with my friends. This was an outdoor spot on the water. It was for my friend Tyler's birthday. I put something on my Instagram story as we all sang at the bar for him. After about an hour, we were done with dinner and just hanging around the outside section of the bar when I got a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and it was Matt. He dabbed me up with a smile and said this was his favorite Saturday night spot. I introduced Matt more officially to my friends this time, saying, "You guys remember Matt?" Even if they hadn't really spoken to him, they did see him the night before. Well, as the night went on, Matt kind of hung around for a while, and it was fine because everyone was drunk, including him, and everyone was just having a good time. The next time I saw Matt was when he invited me golfing on a hot day. Honestly, I suck at golfing, but it's something I want to get better at, so when he invited me early one Sunday morning, I went. I think it was literally the following weekend after I saw him last. It was just him and I going. I tried to get a couple of my friends to go, but they were too hungover and said it was too early. Matt and I just vibed playing golf. I think it was only 9 holes. It took us like 2 hours. Afterwards, we got food, and then I went home to relax before work the next day. I saw Matt one more time out after that, before he invited me on a hiking trip with him to Arizona. Honestly, Arizona and the Grand Canyon were always on my bucket list. I just checked the dates with work and confirmed I was able to go first, and I was an immediate yes. I asked Tyler and a couple of other friends to come with, but they were heavy no's. They said they couldn't get the time off work and needed to save money, the typical responses from any of my friends when I try to get them on a trip. I asked Matt if any of his boys were going, and he said nah, he was going solo dolo. I actually hadn't met any of Matt's friends yet. His Instagram painted him as this super popular guy though, so I didn't find it weird. We flew out on August 15th, and our return flights to Chicago were August 18th. We landed at night. Matt rented a car for the weekend, and on the way to the Airbnb, we stopped for food and alcohol. By the time we got to the Airbnb, it was late. We had a couple of beers when we got there, and I could tell that Matt was down to stay up longer, but I was admittedly shot and wanted to go to sleep. This was when I realized there was only one bed in the Airbnb. I had never asked him to confirm that there were 2 bedrooms. When I brought it up, he pointed to the couch I was sitting on and said it's a pull-out couch. He then said relax and that he's not going to charge me for the Airbnb. Honestly, a free stay in Arizona, I couldn't complain about the couch. I pulled out the sofa bed, set up the sheets, and went to sleep. It was surprisingly comfortable. In the middle of the night, I woke up to Matt walking through the living room to the kitchen to get water. I'm a light sleeper. The sound of a pin drop will make me wake up. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, Matt woke me up early. It was a sunny, gorgeous day, and we drove straight to the Grand Canyon. I had no idea just how massive it truly was, or how many individual trail options there were. We hiked the Bright Angel, I think. I didn't realize how out of shape I was until that day. Matt was perfectly fine, laughing and telling me to keep up while I was dripping in sweat and out of breath. We took numerous breaks, which we used to take a million amazing pictures. It was beautiful. Eventually, we got back to the car. We had been hiking for over 2 to 3 hours, and I needed food. We stopped by a deli on the way back. It was a long drive back to Phoenix, and when we got there, we took a midday nap, and then after that, we explored around Phoenix. And of course, in Matt fashion, we drank at multiple bars. I barely knew the guy, but I could already see he liked his alcohol. Fast forward, we got really, really drunk. but I think I got drunker, and I'm not sure how, because Matt was downing as many drinks as me. We had to leave the rental on the street and Uber back to the Airbnb. It was late. Time flew by somehow. I don't remember much besides Matt blasting music in the Airbnb for a bit and my plugging my phone in next to the couch. I guess I just went to sleep after that. That night, I woke up randomly, probably a couple of hours after I fell asleep. My bladder was about to explode and my mouth was drier than the Grand Canyon. I got off the couch and headed toward the bathroom, but I heard something. A crack in the floor, like a crack from pressure. I scanned around the dark room with my eyes and saw nothing, so I went to the bathroom. While I was in there, midstream, I heard a door clicking shut. It had to be Matt's bedroom door. When I finished peeing, I went to try Matt's door, but it was locked. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Whatever, I went back to the couch and fell back asleep pretty easily. The next morning, I woke up at like 8 a.m., head throbbing. The first thing I noticed was my phone. It was in a weird position. I had it charging last night and left it laying on the floor next to the couch bed, but now it was sitting on the table next to the couch and it was unplugged. I was questioning why I might have done this, but ultimately my answer was simple. I was just super drunk. That day, we obviously didn't do any hiking, otherwise I would have puked. We just Ubered to the car and then did some driving around, exploring different neighborhoods, scenery, and checking out the botanical gardens. I didn't really want to drink that day, but later on, Matt convinced me, and wouldn't you know it, it was another night of getting really, really drunk. Our flight was at like 1 p.m. the following day, so at least we didn't have to worry about getting up really early. We got back to the Airbnb late again, I'd say between 1 and 2 a.m. this time. Matt insisted on letting me sleep in the bed that night, just because it was fair. Honestly, I didn't argue. I eventually took my bag to his room and then said goodnight and shut the door. I didn't lock it. Not that it mattered, because the locks from what I remembered had those doorknobs with locks that you could easily unlock with like a butter knife or something. I wish I could say the story ended there and that we went home in peace the next day. Well, I woke up that night, probably not long after I fell asleep. I didn't know what woke me up at first. It's like waking up to a sound, but you didn't fully consciously hear that sound because you were still technically asleep when it caused you to wake up. I looked around the room, and then for my phone. My phone was missing. I had it plugged in next to the bed and had the phone on the bed next to me, but now the cord was just dangling from the outlet to the ground with no phone. How could this happen again? I looked on one side of the bed on the floor, and then the other, and I jumped up and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw Matt laying face down, sprawled out on that side of the bed on the floor. He looked up, looking like he'd just woken up from a deep sleep. I shouted, "What are you doing?" He looked around the room, acting confused, like he didn't know how he got there. He stood up and said that he must have been so blacked out that he just walked in here to go to bed, but then remembered I was in the bed and he crashed on the floor. But that didn't make sense because he was on the side of the bed further from the door. I then accused him of taking my phone, and he played dumb. He said I should check under the bed, maybe it fell. Then he got on his knees, looked under the bed, and instantly said, "Bro, here it is," and he pulled it out from under the bed. I looked at him, and I genuinely felt like I was staring at a different person now. Who was this guy? Did he really try getting into my phone twice? I told him I'll just go back to the couch, but he insisted he would, and then he left the room. You bet your ass I locked the door this time. If it weren't for the phone, sure, I'd just see it as he was really drunk and did something goofy, like come pass out on the floor, but I was detecting bullshit there. He took my phone, and I know it. Since I was still kind of drunk, I didn't really have much trouble falling back asleep. Once again, I wish it ended there, but it didn't. I woke up one more time that night, and this time, I quickly realized why. At the foot of my bed was Matt standing there, but all I could really see was his silhouette. For some reason, I didn't jump or scream this time. He sat down on the bed and started rubbing my foot, and that's when I screamed at him to get out. He wouldn't move, so I had to physically push him off the bed and out the bedroom door. I started packing my clothes into my bag, and then quickly packed all my toiletries and whatever else I packed. He didn't say a word. He sat upright on the couch watching me like a creepy NPC the entire time. It was the most unsettling part. I called an Uber to the airport. I wasn't staying there another minute. He didn't try to stop me. I got to the airport just as the sun was starting to rise, and as hard as I tried to sleep, I couldn't. My mind was just racing. I waited there the entire time for the flight. I paid like $35 to change my seat so I wouldn't be next to Matt. I looked out the window the entire time the plane was boarding so I wouldn't have to make eye contact with him. I didn't tell any of my friends until later that day. I just needed time to process and digest everything. A couple of my friends said, "See, I told you he was weird," and pointed out that both times we ran into him, he was alone. It got me also thinking that the only reason he ran into me at the outdoor bar was because he saw my Instagram story and probably came there. Actual stalker behavior. I blocked his number and Instagram, but before doing so, I went to one of his older Instagram posts where he was with friends. No one was tagged in the picture, but I looked at the comments, and there was one comment from a guy who looked like he was in the picture. I saw that Matt wasn't even following him or vice versa. I took it upon myself to DM the guy, asking if he was still friends with Matt. The guy responded back within 10 minutes saying this: "Nah, guy's a freak, run away." From there, he told me about his own experience along with the other guys who used to be friends with him, who all had to cut him off. The guy untagged himself for Matt's photo, but he said he can't forcibly get him to take down the picture. He wasn't surprised at all when I told him what had happened in Arizona, and the guy's response was, "Guy should be in jail." It's crazy that I thought Matt was just a normal dude who was looking for a bro, but he ended up being a potentially dangerous predator. I still just want to know what he was trying to access on my phone. This happened last summer, around mid-July. I was home from college for a few weeks, and I was just trying to enjoy the break before my next semester started. My name's Kyle, and I live in Maryland. I had been talking with my two closest friends, Jason and Marcus, about doing something together. Just the three of us, like we used to back in high school. We all go to different colleges now, so it's rare that we get time like this. We ended up planning a weekend beach trip to Ocean City. Jason's family owns a small beach house there that they don't use much, and he got permission for us to stay there for a few days. It was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place a couple blocks off the sand, but it was perfect for what we needed. Just time to relax, party a bit, and catch up. We drove down on a Friday afternoon. The weather was hot, upper 80s, with that heavy humid air that sticks to your skin. It smelled like sunscreen and salt water the second we got into town. We spent the day walking the boardwalk, messing around in some of the arcades, and people watching. The beach was packed with tourists, kids running around with beach balls, families with umbrellas and coolers, and lifeguards constantly yelling at people to move out of the restricted areas. Everything felt normal. It was just a fun summer day. Later, we went back to the house, grilled burgers, had a few drinks, and started playing drinking games. By midnight, we were drunk and bored, and someone, maybe Marcus, suggested we go back to the beach. There's something weirdly appealing about being near the ocean at night. The beach is almost completely empty, the air cools down, and there's just something peaceful about it. We didn't bring much with us, just some hoodies in case we get cold, our phones, and a flashlight Jason grabbed from the kitchen drawer. We didn't plan to swim around or anything, just hang out and maybe walk along the shore. We headed down a side street and onto the wooden boardwalk, then took the steps down to the sand. As expected, it was basically completely deserted. The waves were steady, and the only light came from a few lamps on the boardwalk and the moon behind some clouds. There was barely enough visibility to make out where the water met the shore. We walked along the edge of the surf, occasionally letting the cold water hit our ankles. We joked around, talked about random stuff, and just killed time. After a while, we stopped near one of the lifeguard towers, those wooden ones they take down at night, and we just laid in the sand looking up at the sky. That's when Jason noticed something. He suddenly sat up and said, "Is that someone walking over there?" We all sat up and looked in the direction he was pointing. At first, I didn't see anything. It just looked like a dark blur near the shoreline. But then, yeah, I saw it. A figure. But it was just a silhouette at that point, walking slowly, right along the edge of where the water touched the sand, probably 50 or 60 yards away. We figured it was just another person out late like us, maybe just going for a walk, but then we noticed that their movement was off. They weren't strolling around like someone enjoying the beach. Their walk was stiff, slow, and almost mechanical. Their arms didn't swing naturally, and their posture was strange. Their head was tilted down, but not fully. It looked like they were staring at the sand or maybe scanning it. We all stopped talking and just quietly watched them. Something about it put me on edge. I remember whispering, "What the hell are they doing?" Marcus suggested that maybe they're just looking for something. Jason joked that it was probably some drunk tourist who dropped their keys. We kinda laughed it off and went back to messing around, but I kept glancing at the person. A few minutes passed, and I noticed they had stopped moving. They weren't walking anymore. They were standing completely still now, and they were definitely closer, maybe 30 yards away. That's when I started feeling uncomfortable. We tried not to stare or shine our light at them, but it was getting hard to ignore. There was just something off about the entire thing. Marcus finally said, "They've been standing there for like 5 minutes. Who just stands like that?" Then Jason said something that made my stomach drop. He said, "He's not just standing, he's looking at you, Kyle." I didn't know if he was joking or not. I kinda laughed nervously and said, "Nah, he's looking at the sand." But Jason shook his head and said, "No, look closer. His head's tilted at you." That's when Jason pointed the flashlight at him. I didn't even want him to do that, honestly, but he clicked it on and aimed the beam. The light hit the figure for just a second before the battery started dying and it flickered out. But that second was enough. I saw him. He was almost grayish white with no shirt. He was wearing wet jeans, clearly from the ocean. His arms hung completely limp at his sides. His head was tilted at a weird angle. Not broken, but unnatural. And his eyes were wide open, almost bulging. The second that beam of light hit him, he moved, fast. Without any hesitation, he broke into a full sprint straight at us. I can't even describe how unnatural it looked. There was no build-up. He went from standing completely still to running at full speed, almost like he launched forward. All three of us screamed and bolted. We didn't even look back, we just ran. I could hear Marcus behind me, yelling "Go!" as our feet pounded into the sand. My lungs were burning. We ran all the way back to the steps leading up to the boardwalk and didn't stop until we got to the street. Only then did we turn around. But he wasn't there. The beach was empty. There were no footprints behind us, just the sound of waves. We stood there frozen, trying to make sense of it. We didn't talk much on the walk back to the house. When we got inside, we locked all the doors and windows, pulled the blinds shut, and stayed up until the sun came up. None of us could sleep. I kept expecting to hear knocking or see that pale face outside the window, but thankfully it never came. The next morning, we tried to laugh it off again, say it was probably just some cracked out homeless guy trying to scare people, but deep down, none of us believed that. The way he moved, the way he appeared out of nowhere, the lack of footprints, it made no sense. We stayed one more night, but we didn't leave the house. We left early the next morning. Over the next few weeks, we tried to move on, but then Jason texted me one night. He said he'd been having dreams, the same dream over and over. He'd wake up and see the guy standing in the corner of his room, soaking wet, head tilted, just staring at him. No movement, no talking, just standing. I told him that was messed up, but I didn't tell him that I was having the exact same dream. Everything was the same, the guy, the posture, just standing in my room, not moving and not talking. Sometimes I wake up thinking I hear the sound of wet footsteps in my hallway. But when I check, no one's there. Then, last week, almost a year later, I was scrolling through this local Facebook group that posts about stuff going on in Ocean City. Someone uploaded a photo they'd taken the night before from the beach. It was grainy and dark, but I recognized what they were talking about. They said, "Does anyone know who this creepy guy is that I saw standing by the water at like 1 a.m.? I clicked the photo. It was blurry, but I recognized him instantly. Same posture, same pale skin. He was just looking down at the water. The comments chilled me even more. There were dozens of people saying they'd seen him too. Some said he was there for hours. One person said they watched him walk into the water and never came back out. Another said they found wet footprints on their back porch 2 streets from the beach, no prints leading to or from them. I don't know what we saw that night, but I know this: I'll never go back to that beach at night again. I grew up in Massachusetts, and every summer since I could remember, I would spend the 3 months in a classic coastal New England town. You know the type if you've been in that area of the country. I had a big group of friends who always did the same thing, and we would get up to all kinds of shenanigans every day after our respective jobs. I was 19 years old when this happened, like most of my friends, and I had just gotten off of a dockboy job I had. So like any other night, I texted my friends what the plan was, and picked up my friend, who I'll call Emerson, from his job to go get alcohol, as he was the one with a fake ID. We got the alcohol and went back to the small town where we lived. We decided to get on my family's boat that I was able to take out on my own, to have some beers while we wait for everyone else to finish what they were doing. We drove around the little peninsula we were on to this place where a lot of people anchor and hang out. There were a couple of boats anchored already, and it was about 7 p.m., but it still wasn't unusual. We found a spot between the 2 boats, threw the anchor down, and just chilled and drank. We were having a nice time, listening to the music from the boat to our left, when the one to our right decided to leave, and then eventually the other boat's music shut off. We thought they were going to leave as well, so Emerson and I, in our new drunken state, began to groan and yell to turn the music back on to keep the party going, and a bunch of other stupid stuff like that, but it didn't happen. We were sitting on the bow and started to drink again before Emerson said, "Dude, look." I turned around to look at the boat and saw 3 people standing on the edge, just looking at us. My first reaction was to laugh because I was drunk, and then I turned back around, but Emerson kept staring at them. Now, admittedly, I don't have a great sense of danger. I tend to be optimistic and lighthearted about most things, but Emerson was obviously uncomfortable. I told him not to worry about it. They were probably just trying to get a better look or something, but he kept looking with an uncomfortable look on his face, which I didn't get at the time. At this point, it's pretty dark, nothing illuminating the area but the lights from their boat, and therefore you couldn't really see who it was, just the silhouettes of these people. After a couple of minutes of trying to get Emerson to snap out of it, I turned back around and saw they were in the same position, staring at us. I thought it was a joke, so I got the megaphone from the compartment over the steering wheel and said, "20 to watch, fellas," which pissed Emerson off because he sensed something wasn't right. I was putting it back when I heard one of them laugh, audibly a man, but something was off about it. It sounded almost sinister. It was slow and low, and it was kind of raspy. It was at that point that I started to feel uncomfortable. Emerson got up and said, "Let's get the hell out of here, bro, this ain't right," but I responded that it was fine. Right after that, we heard 2 splashes in the water from their direction and saw that only one silhouette remained on the boat. That made Emerson immediately start pulling the anchor up, as I was laughing at the situation and at him, which, looking back now, was unbelievably stupid. He tried telling me to turn the engine on while I was laughing my ass off watching him pull the anchor up as I was trying to drink my beer. In fact, I was laughing so much that I didn't notice the sound of the 2 people swimming near our boat. Emerson paused and looked at me with the anchor in his hands, which made me pause too. We couldn't see into the water, as it was dark and the lights were off with the boat. I called out hello and got nothing. Even the sound of the splashing water stopped. Right after that, I simultaneously heard Emerson yell, "Oh shit," and a sudden splash of water behind me before I turned and saw someone trying to climb onto the back of our boat. I freaked the fuck out, and while turning the key, I saw a hand grab the railing on the side of our boat near Emerson, who was yelling and holding the anchor up, ready to fight. I finally turned the boat on and instinctively gunned it forward, smashing into the sandbar that was right in front of us. I put it in reverse and drove backwards as fast as possible until we were out of the little bay and back into more open water. I threw it back in neutral, and Emerson and I just looked at each other before he started giving me the "I told you so's" and "you're a dumbass." I fully agreed and said we should go back, at which he agreed. In hindsight, we should have hightailed it back to the boat docks near my house, but for some reason, we decided to pick up everything that was thrown around during our escape. We didn't even finish before I noticed in the direction we just came from, the lights of a boat approaching, and it was approaching fast. I said no fucking way, and jumped back to the steering wheel and pushed full throttle. Our boat is old, so it doesn't go super fast, and even though I was full speed ahead, they were gaining on us. Emerson started to lose it, saying things like, "Who are these guys? What do they want? Why can't they just let us chill on the water?" So I told him to chill out and focused on going straight to the docks. After about 5 minutes, the docks were in sight, but the boat behind us was so close that we could see the bow itself going up and down with the waves. I honestly didn't know what to do. I banged a hard left and got as close to the shore as I could without beaching, and miraculously, the other boat peeled off in the other direction. We breathed sighs of relief, but I still went full speed back to the docks. After docking and being relieved at the fact that there wasn't any damage to the boat, we met up with our friends after that and told them what had happened, and also came up with some theories, like maybe they wanted to rob us, or maybe they wanted to take the boat. We didn't recognize the boat, so they probably weren't from around here. I don't know. I don't like to think about what would have happened. I'm just glad we didn't find out. I do know that I'm thankful for Emerson being there. Without his skepticism, I think things definitely could have taken a turn for the worst. My girlfriend and I love skiing. It's how we met. So last year, during both of our vacation times, we Airbnb'd a one-bedroom cabin in Colorado by Vail Mountain. One of my friends told us getting a private cabin was a lot more cozy, peaceful, and romantic. After landing at the airport, we taxied to a rental car place and rented a Honda Civic, probably the cheapest car we could get. We drove a constant uphill through the sludge on the roads until we pulled off the main road onto a more foresty side road. Eventually, we made it to the cabin. Far and isolated from anyone else, but not too far where getting to the mountain would be a pain in the ass. The owner left the key hidden in the mailbox. As soon as I unlocked the door and we stepped inside, we got a huge whiff of, wood. It literally smelled exactly how you'd expect a log cabin to smell. It wasn't huge, but it was spacious enough. One bedroom, one bathroom, decent living room with a TV, and a kitchen. I was paying chump change for it, so I was more than happy with it. Plus, we were there to ski, not sit around the cabin. We got there towards the end of the day, so we didn't hit the slopes that night. We actually just unloaded and got right back on the road to pick up a pizza for dinner. We got back and ate on the couch in the living room while watching a movie. With the dark, moody lighting and the whole log cabin atmosphere, it actually was quite romantic, until my girlfriend started freaking out about her bag. Apparently it wasn't where she left it, which was on the coffee table in the living room. I helped her look around, though there wasn't much space to search. She was absolutely positive she left it on the coffee table. It wasn't in the bathroom, kitchen, or living room, so I checked the bedroom, and sure enough, it was sitting right next to the bed. I picked it up and brought it to the doorway of the bedroom with a smirk on my face. My girlfriend didn't seem as relieved as I thought she would be, though. She accused me of moving it and going through her bag, which I found downright insane. We had a bit of an argument until I convinced her that she in fact put her bag in there and that she had just forgotten. We went back to eating and watching the movie, and we got over the argument quickly. The next day, we hit the slopes from early morning till dusk. We stopped on the way back to the cabin to get dinner again. When we returned back to the cabin, we both immediately noticed the living room light was on. My girlfriend was slightly freaking out. I told her to chill. The front door was still locked, so that confirmed nobody had broken in. I thought obviously one of us left the light on by mistake and didn't notice earlier because it was bright out. So once again, we ate our food and watched a movie, when suddenly, out of nowhere, my girlfriend shrieked. I jumped up and looked at her. She had one hand covering her mouth, the other pointing at something on the ground. At first I didn't see it, but when I got up confused and moved closer, I saw it. It was a pair of somewhat fresh boot marks in the rug in the corner of the living room. The snow from the boots had melted into wet stains in the area rug. Obviously both of us wore boots, but I just didn't remember stepping over there.
My girlfriend asked me to check around the cabin to make her feel safe, so I did. I peeped under the kitchen table, behind the living room couch, in the bathroom, and I took a peep in the bedroom. There didn't appear to be anyone in the cabin. There weren't really many places to hide anyway. Still, she was scared and seemed to lose all interest in the movie. She went to the bathroom and brushed her teeth, then went to the bedroom to change, and I heard her jump into bed. So I did all the same. I climbed into bed and shut the light, and we sat there for a while just talking. It was actually only like 9 or 10 p.m. My girlfriend kept letting me know how uncomfortable she was, thinking someone was in the cabin. So I told her, okay, just wait 1 second. I took out my phone and dialed the Airbnb host. I put the phone up to my ear and heard it ring. I don't mean the ring coming from the phone speaker. I meant I heard a loud, muffled ringing coming from behind the wall next to the bed. The ringing stopped as soon as I saw my call was rejected. My girlfriend started screaming, "Oh my God." I told her to calm down as I got up and approached the wall to the left. I noticed an ever so slight crack in the wall that looked like it could be a door. My girlfriend screamed at me not to open it, but I got myself angry, yelled, and pulled open the door. There I was, faced with a small hidden closet, and inside, a man hiding behind a cardboard box in the corner. It was the host, the owner of the cabin. I'd seen his picture on the listing. I'll admit I jumped and screamed in fear and shock when I saw him, but anger overcame me and I grabbed him by his shirt and pulled him out. I knew he looked creepy based on his picture. He had his hands up, apologizing. I told him to shut up. I looked deeper in the closet and, to my disgust, found some of my girlfriend's underwear. It took way too long for the police to arrive, but he was arrested. We had to spend the rest of that night at a hotel, and the next day we went home. I requested compensation from Airbnb, and it took months for them to refund me, but they eventually did. This story was so bizarre and disturbing, I don't even expect everyone to believe it when I tell it, but it was oh too real. When my best friend Lizzie and I were 18, we went on our first vacation alone together to London. We were staying at the London Marriott Hotel. The first thing we did upon arrival was, of course, to get there and drop off all our luggage. We'd be there for a whole week, so we had to set our itinerary. It was late in the day already, so we didn't have much time that day, but we did want to see something at least, so we went to see Big Ben, which is that iconic big clock tower that everyone knows in pictures when you think of London. After that, we went to a nearby tavern for dinner called St. Stephen's Tavern. It was money, but good thing our dads were paying for this trip. After leaving the tavern, it was like 9 o'clock, and we were wanting to go out and experience the nightlife. We agreed we'd first have to go back to the hotel and shower and change first. As we were walking, a young, attractive man overheard us talking about the nearby bars we were looking at on our phones, and he stopped us. Something about him immediately was just charming that grabs both my and Lizzie's attention, and if it weren't for that, maybe we wouldn't have been so receptive to him telling us about a big apartment party that one of his rich friends was throwing that night, and that two attractive ladies like ourselves would fit right in. Lizzie and I looked at each other and laughed. We said we'd be down, and he said great, the party doesn't start till 11. He asked for my number, so I gave it to him. Then he said he'd text me the details and see us later, and down the street he walked. Lizzie and I were super excited. It was only the first night and we were already invited to a crazy London party. We figured if we played our cards right with the wealthy people at this apartment party, we would have people to hang out with the rest of the trip. We got back to the hotel, showered and changed, and we pre-gamed with a little vodka first to loosen ourselves up. I think we drank more than we should have though. I texted the guy we met, realizing we didn't even get his name. He texted back quickly with the address to the apartment. So we loudly marched into the street to wait for our Uber. It was a 15-minute Uber drive to get to the apartment, and when we got there, we couldn't believe how different the architecture of this apartment building was compared to something back home in America. I pressed the code for the apartment, and we were quickly buzzed in. We took the elevator to the 5th floor. We were excited but nervous, not knowing what to expect. The alcohol was definitely helping though. I knocked on the door to the apartment, but we didn't hear music inside, which was odd. We were nervous we had the wrong apartment until the young man from earlier opened the door. He hugged us hello and welcomed us into this dead, quiet apartment. He shut the door, and we asked, "Where is everyone?" He said, "Oh, it's still early, don't worry." We looked around the apartment, and it was not at all as big as we were expecting for an apparent rich guy. We asked where his friend who owned the apartment was. The man said he was getting things ready in his room. He told us to sit and make ourselves comfortable. I remember looking at my phone and seeing it was like 11:30. Lizzie and I sat down, and I could tell by her face she was as put off by this as I was. The man sat down on the same couch as us, next to me. He was uncomfortably close. Suddenly, another man came out from another room. He didn't say anything. He didn't smile. He just looked at us as he walked towards the door to the apartment. Then he just stood there. The man on the couch with us started asking us questions like where we were from and if it was just us two visiting here. I started feeling sick to my stomach. The man next to us got up and went to the kitchen to get us some drinks. The man by the door stood there. Lizzie was to the left of me, so she was more hidden from view. I whispered in her ear to dial 911. She did so, and I noticed her tapping on the phone multiple times, indicating to the call taker that we needed help. Lizzie then suddenly called out loudly to the man in the kitchen, "This is apartment 5C, right?" The man at the door said yes in a deep, unfriendly voice. I whispered to Lizzie again that we needed to stall, and not to drink any drinks the man gave us. As I was whispering to Lizzie, the man standing at the door called to the man in the kitchen to hurry up with the drinks, and then he came back from the kitchen with the drinks. I had to think on my feet, to stall as long as possible before drinking whatever he just set in front of us. I put on a fake and bubbly persona and said we should play Would You Rather. I know it sounds juvenile, but I had to think of a game that didn't involve drinking. The man seemed to play along with it, so me and Lizzie started coming up with Would You Rather questions. And he started coming up with some of his own, but he would often suggest we take a sip of our drinks, saying the guest would be there soon and that we needed to loosen up some more. I stalled for as long as I could, saying we already drank a lot, but we'd be down to drink more in a little bit. I remember when things were about to turn really south. The two men looked at each other. Then the bigger, scarier man at the door came over and said, "All right, drink your drinks." He was about to reach for one of the glasses to probably force in my face, when there was an aggressive banging at the door, followed by a man shouting police. The younger man looked at us and asked, "Did you call the police?" I said, "No, why and when would we?" But my voice cracked as I said this, indicating I was nervous. Lizzie apparently just decided the hell with my story and screamed help. The police started to attempt to kick the door down, but the bigger man screamed, all right, and opened the door with his hands up. The two men tried playing innocent. Lizzie and I had to fabricate the story a little bit, saying the two men basically forced us into the apartment and wouldn't let us leave, and that we were pretty sure they drugged our drinks. That was enough to get the men arrested. A second police car arrived to escort us to the station for further questioning. The drinks were tested, and it turned out to no surprise they were roofied. This was definitely a scarring experience, but we didn't let it ruin our trip to London. In fact, we never told our parents until years later just because it would probably make them less likely to let us travel anymore. The alcohol definitely didn't help our initial decision-making in the night. But our advice would probably be don't ever trust strangers, no matter what they look like. When I was 14, my parents took us on a trip to a family resort. It was in the middle of nowhere, and it was the most countryish, old-style resort you could ever imagine. Every building was made of wood, there were big creepy bugs crawling around, the inside of the resort halls all smelled like cigarettes. I felt too old to be in there with my family, especially since I'm the only boy out of my siblings, and my sisters were 9 and 5 at the time. I tried looking for teens my age to make friends with, but it really seemed like it was just families with younger kids. However, I met this girl who was 15. We met in the little arcade hall when I was with my two sisters. She came up to me and said, "Hey." As it turned out, she was staying here with her family too, and she wasn't having a good time either. So we started to hang out. She seemed kind of cool, a little strange, had somewhat gothy vibes to her. Her name was Alyssa. The next day, I ran into her again as I was passing by the pool. She waved me over, and she said let's go for a walk in the woods by the river. As we did, I tried to get to know her more. I asked her what building her room was in. She hesitated before her answer and then said, "The one next to the main hall." It was a vague answer. We sat by the river for a while, and I gotta admit, she started talking about some weird, dark stuff. I won't get into it, but I started to think she had some issues. Then she looked up at me and said, "Can we go to your room?" I lit up with excitement inside. I was a 14-year-old boy, hormones raging, so obviously I said yes with a little too much excitement in me, imagining the best case scenario. We got close to my room and she asked for the card to open the door, and she ran ahead to open it. We sat on my bed for a few minutes. I was a bit awkward, so I didn't know how to make a move or if to make a move. She started talking about deep, dark stuff again though. How she hated her family, how she had no more friends, how she likes the feel of blood, whatever that meant. Then out of nowhere, she flicked open a huge switchblade and looked at me. She told me sometimes she thinks about using this on herself or someone else. That was the moment this went from weird to disturbing. This wasn't going where I thought it was. It was actually going in a much darker, scarier direction. The way she looked at me with the knife flicked open was scaring me. She looked at me and said, "Do you want to use this knife on someone here?" I thought over my answer and said, "I don't know, I have to think about it." Obviously I would never, but this girl's true psychotic nature had just come out, and I had to play it safe. I said we should go back outside and walk around. She said okay. So we went back outside and walked around the resort grounds. I watched the way she looked at people passing by, staring them down, not caring when they would notice. Luckily, I saw my parents straight ahead, and I said, "Oh shoot, there's my parents. I should probably go hang out with them." Alyssa looked a little bit annoyed. All she said was, "Okay." I said, "See ya," and she just looked at me. I went to my family, and for the rest of the day and night, I stayed with them, hoping to not run into that freaky girl again. That night, we got back to the room around 9. This resort had huge rooms, so basically I had my own room that was attached to my parents' and sister's room, but it also had its own door into the hall. Anyway, I went to sleep, or at least tried to. Half an hour into laying in bed, I heard the beep from the door unlocking, and then the door to my room opening and closing. By the time I fully looked up, the door was shut and the light from the hall was gone. I saw someone standing in front of the door though. "Who is it?" I said. I heard a familiar girl's voice. "I want blood." I sat up and remembered I never got my key card back from Alyssa. She planned this. She approached my bed in the dark with something in her left hand because she had it lifted. She said it again. "I want blood. Will you help me, or will I get it from you?" I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like a goddamn girl. She still stood there. She didn't charge at me, she didn't run at first. When my dad burst into the room though, that's when she took off. My dad saw her, and I yelled she was about to kill me. He was about to go after her, but I screamed, "Don't, she has a knife." Everyone in the hall came out of their rooms to see what was going on. We went down to the main office to get some info on this Alyssa girl, and out of all the guests, there was no one named Alyssa. Hell, there were no girls even close to her age staying at the resort at that current time. Police were called and like 4 cop cars showed up and searched the whole perimeter. I think like 2 or 3 cop cars stayed overnight since there were so many kids at the place. The key card lock was changed on our door for the night. A lot of families, including mine, left the next day, and we got a refund for the 2 days we cut short. This whole thing was actually insane. That girl was fucked up in the head. And it's scary knowing she was probably in the early stages of being a completely different monster.
Summer is the greatest season by a long shot. That's a hill I'll die on any day. My love for the summer doesn't revolve around partying or drinking as you may expect, but nature. Warmer weather and the outdoors are inseparable in my opinion, and I guarantee you that when the heat rolls through, I spend more hours outside than inside. It was a warm night in mid-June a few summers ago when this happened. I was 17 or 18 at the time. For context, there's a massive nature preserve near my house. When I say massive, I mean it. It's close to 1,000 acres in size. To this day, there are still parts of it that I'm positive I haven't explored. 2 of my friends and I agreed to spend a night camping in those woods. Technically, camping there was strictly forbidden and borderline illegal, but we figured that there was no chance someone would catch us in this dense forest. We just have to trek as deeply as possible. Chuck was the camping fanatic of the group. I'm telling you, this kid loved cosplaying as a Boy Scout and probably knew close to 100 different knots. Our other friend Jackson always supplied the drinks. If we were sober, he was unhappy. That's just how things went when Jackson was involved. I remember the feeling of the gentle summer breeze blowing through my hair as the 3 of us packed up Jackson's car. The weather was ideal, not too cold, not too hot. A few beers later, the 3 of us found ourselves lugging camping equipment through the woods at like 11:30. I can't lie, I was feeling the alcohol start to hit me as we marched along. Chuck always carried this industrial-grade flashlight with him, so the darkness of the forest wasn't much of an issue. As much as I enjoyed the outdoors though, traversing through thick woods at this hour was a bit creepy, even with Chuck's flashlight on hand. After close to half an hour of straight walking, the 3 of us found ourselves in a small, flat clearing that was an ideal spot to set up camp. We pitched our tent as per Chuck's instruction and set our chairs up. The fire was the next step. Chuck once again took the lead on this, and after a few more minutes, we had a pretty decent fire going. Jackson reached into his bag and tossed me another drink. He then grabbed his JBL speaker and started playing some music. The vibe was perfect, and we must have been talking and drinking for a good 2 hours. We were all pretty drunk at that point, and I could tell the other guys were just about ready to pack it up for the night. Jackson turned the music down and started collecting discarded beer cans. Just then, a deafening whistle pierced the silence. I nearly jumped out of my seat, going from drunken haze to high alert in a matter of seconds. I don't know how to describe it. The whistle was abnormally loud, but still sounded distant. Jackson quickly shut the speaker off, and the 3 of us sat in silence as we exchanged concerned looks. I could feel my heartbeat pounding through my chest. We sat there, frozen in place for what seemed like forever, listening intently to our surroundings. But there was nothing. It almost seemed quieter now than it had when we first got there. Like eerily quiet. Not even the normal wood sounds you come to anticipate. I used that time to play my memory of the whistle back in my head. It definitely wasn't an animal's noise. The best way I can describe it is a standard whistle you'd hear at a ballpark. Chuck finally broke the silence, quietly urging us to pack up and leave. Jackson and I disagreed with that plan, though. We might risk encountering whoever made the noise, which I was beyond terrified of. It was past 3 a.m. at this point. An encounter this late would only mean trouble. Chuck hypothesized that whoever made that noise was probably aware of our presence, which was a chilling thought. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, staying put violated every survival instinct I had. Packing up and leaving at this hour didn't seem like a much better option either, though. We finally agreed to wait it out. I went to put the fire out, but Chuck cautioned me against it, saying that a fire would repel any dangerous animals. Only then did the true gravity of the situation smack me in the face. We were literally miles away from any civilization, it was 3 a.m., and there was an unknown entity somewhere in the darkness. Another 10 minutes or so passed, and we had resumed talking, but at a much lower volume with no music. I don't think any of us felt safe going to sleep just yet, though. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something small flew over the darkness of Jackson's shoulder and landed directly in the fire. It was a firecracker. I screamed bloody murder as it started sparkling in the fire, and Chuck cursed as he sprung up out of his chair and bolted into the darkness. Jackson and I scrambled to follow, leaving all of our stuff behind. We caught up with Chuck, whose flashlight was beaming wildly through the woods as he frantically sprinted. We ran until we couldn't anymore, and Jackson keeled over and threw up. Chuck shut the light off and the three of us stood there, panting, trying to figure out if we were being followed. To my surprise, it didn't seem like anyone followed us. I don't think I've ever been so afraid, though. Why in the world would someone have done that? We needed to figure out what to do. Jackson wanted to just find our way out of the woods and never come back, but Chuck was reluctant to leave all of his camping gear behind. Plus, he reminded us the fire was still active. I was dumbfounded. How could he be concerned with forest fires after what had just happened? Eventually, I agreed with Chuck that we should at least check on the site. After all, no one had actually chased us. So there was a slight possibility that whoever threw that firecracker was just playing a cruel prank. Chuck was a navigational expert and was actually able to retrace our footsteps. I could make out the glow of the fire as we quietly approached. Before I could get any closer, though, Jackson put a hand in front of me and pointed with a horrified look on his face. I strained my eyes to make out the site in the distance. What I saw is probably the most terrifying thing I'd ever laid eyes on. There were 3 people sitting motionlessly in our chairs like statues. The one whose face I could see looked lifeless and his mouth was hung open. I was afraid to move. What were they even doing? I thought, realizing that they weren't even talking. This was not normal. The 3 of us watched for a little while longer before deciding to back off. We turned to leave, but Jackson's foot clipped a rock, causing him to curse in frustration. Within seconds, the glow from the fire abruptly went dark, as if it had been covered with a cloak. It was freakishly fast. We didn't stick around another second. We again sprinted away from the site, but this time we could hear footsteps crashing behind us. We didn't stop this time. We bolted out of the woods and ran all the way to Jackson's car. By some miracle, we weren't followed out of the woods. None of us spoke on the drive back, each of us lost in our thoughts. The next day, Chuck insisted we return to the site in the daylight to collect his belongings. Jackson wanted nothing to do with that, but I agreed to accompany Chuck. After some searching, we eventually found the site, which looked mostly untouched. That is, until we got a little closer and noticed the putrid smell coming from Chuck's tent. He unzipped it, and we found a dead, rotting rat. It was sickening. I took the hint, and haven't been back to that preserve since. This ongoing issue started about a month ago, but let me provide some context first. I'm 24 years old and I live with my parents. My family is not well off and never has been, and pretty much all of the money I make goes into supporting the household. My relationship with my parents is not the best. We bicker quite often, and whenever I'm not working or hanging with friends, I tend to stick to myself. I don't want to write a hard luck story or anything like that, but I've had it tough growing up. Fitness has always been my go-to escape. I see it as a healthy way to get my mind off personal burdens, while also providing a good excuse to leave the house. There's a park about a 10-minute drive from my house that has a workout facility, with bars for pull-ups, dips, and other calisthenic exercises. During the summer months, I like to go there to work out as nature helps calm my mind. I like to go at nighttime because since it's a public park, it tends to get busy during the day. So one night, while my parents were arguing, I decided to slip out of the house to go work out. It was an extremely hot summer night, probably 85 degrees. I remember breathing in the humid air as I walked from my doorstep to the beat-up white Corolla sitting in our driveway. I started the rickety engine and rolled down the windows as the warm summer breeze flowed through my hair. I arrived at the park and exited my car. I was the only car in the lot. It was probably 10 or 11 p.m. The park was completely empty at this time. The beautiful scenery mixed with the steamy air to create a soothing atmosphere, which is another reason why I like this park so much. It sits on top of a hill that overlooks the downtown area of my city, which always adds pleasant and sentimental emotions to my evenings. Anyway, I started a set on the pull-up bar. I wasn't really counting the repetitions. When I work out, I just do it till failure, then take a break and do it a couple more times. It was somewhere between my sets when I took a break to loosen up my arms. Before I got back on the bar though, an indescribable feeling came over me, and a subconscious urge forced me to turn my head around. Standing literally a foot away from my face was a tall, beaten-looking man. I actually screamed and jumped like 5 feet back. He let out a raunchy, boisterous laugh and apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare me. His appearance and mannerisms were extremely eccentric right off the bat. like he was damn near face to face with me. He clearly had something wrong with him. I asked him why he was so close to me, and he said he lives here. He explained that he sees me working out here all the time, and asked me if I could teach him. Now, I'm a very non-confrontational type of person, and especially during a time like that, I really just wanted to be left alone. I awkwardly but politely told him I'm just going to do some pull-ups and leave. I hopped back on the bar and continued my set. His words marinated in my mind. He sees me here all the time? I felt the gaze of his eyes burning the back of my neck, but like I said, I'm very non-confrontational. While he did make me increasingly uneasy, I didn't really know what to say or do about it. But then something really weird happened. Right as I was about to finish my set, I heard him mutter my full name. My blood instantly turned cold as I jumped off the bar and slowly backed away. I said a shaky, "What?" He didn't respond, and instead just stared at me with this crazed, wide-eyed smile. I thought I might have been hearing things. That's how bizarre it was. I started to get an awful feeling in my gut, like something bad was about to happen. Without another word, I decided to quickly walk back to my car and leave. I felt that man staring at me while I retreated, and thankfully he didn't follow me. Before I left the park, though, I took one last look, and I saw him hanging from the bar, attempting to do a pull-up. I watched as he grabbed the bar, tried to pull himself up, and then failed and tried again, in the exact position I was previously in. I swiftly left the park without looking back. The entire ride back, I questioned myself. Did he really say my name? Was I hallucinating? I tried to forget about it, and eventually I did. I woke up early the next day to get to work. I work construction and I have to wake up very early before my parents, so I was the first one to notice the unmarked envelope sitting at my front door. It was addressed to me. I picked it up and figured I'd read whatever was inside whenever I had the chance. It was another sweltering hot summer day, and I took my lunch break early to cool down. I sat in my car while eating my pre-made sandwich and decided to open the envelope. I didn't really know what to expect, but never in a million years did I think I'd find 10 printed photos of me. They were all unknowingly taken. One was of me in my car, one was of me at work, one was of me exercising at the park. I instantly remembered that creepy man from the night before and started to feel uncontrollably nauseous. I stared in disbelief as I flipped through the rest of them. One was of my house, and the worst of all was a photo of me sleeping, taken from outside my window. I nearly choked on my food as tears rolled down my cheeks. I felt unsafe. I told my boss a serious issue popped up and I left work right away. He wasn't happy with me, but I didn't care. I took a picture of the photos and drove directly to the police station. I gave the police the photos and explained my encounter at the park. I described the man to them, and they said they would look into it. I told my parents about it too, and for the first time in a long time, I actually got some sympathy out of them. More things started happening though. A couple nights later, at like 3 a.m., I awoke to knocks at the door. I didn't open it, assuming the worst. One day, I found a sticky note pasted to my car window with a heart drawn in Sharpie. I went back to the police to report this, and they said they would open up a stalker investigation. I haven't heard back from them yet. I figured it's hard to build a case without having concrete evidence. This happened about a month ago, and I've been on high alert ever since. My parents are looking for a new home, which is already tough given our financial situation. I'll update if anything further happens, but until then, I'll continue to sleep with one eye open. This happened to me last summer when I was 22. I wasn't a very outgoing kid at the time. If I ever did anything social, it was because my degenerate friends had somehow dragged me out of the house. This was one of those times. Well, it was supposed to be. My friend Philip invited me to a house party at like 8 p.m. It was pretty spontaneous, but I had nothing going on, so I reluctantly agreed to go with him. I knew he was going to give me crap if I refused. I can't even lie though, the idea of a party, even with strangers, sounded more appealing than being alone. Philip was a few towns over from me, so it made more sense for us to drive separately instead of going together. He gave me the Addy and I was on my way. The literal second I pulled onto the street, Philip bailed at the last minute. Rightfully so, I was super frustrated. How could he bail on me like this? There I was, feeling like a complete idiot outside a stranger's house. Annoyed but determined not to waste the night, I decided to go in. Drove all the way here, I thought. Might as well go inside. I walked up the front steps and knocked on the door. The host, Randy, greeted me warmly. He was instantly likable, charismatic, and friendly without being a douchebag. He introduced me around, and things were actually less awkward than I had anticipated. People were really friendly to me despite not knowing who I was. There were even a few girls I had my eyes on. I decided to enjoy the party and hit the booze. Hard. It was getting pretty late, but the party was still raging. Admittedly, I might have overdone it with the drinking. At one point, I was so nauseous and dizzy that I needed a break. It must have been close to 2 a.m. at that point. I went upstairs to look for a bathroom, but they were all occupied. The house was deceptively big. Granted, it was probably the alcohol, but I was literally getting lost stumbling through the maze of hallways up there. After making it to the top floor, I found a door leading to what seemed like an attic or storage room. Desperate for privacy, I figured it was as good a place as any to pull myself together. I groped around blindly for the light switch, but there was none. This was definitely an attic or something, as there was also dust everywhere. There was a window in the far corner which I opened, allowing the cool night breeze to wash over me. There was a solid minute there where I was seriously considering throwing up onto the roof. The breeze somewhat cured my nausea though, so I just kept my head hung out of the window. It was dark outside, and the quiet was a refreshing contrast to the boisterous chaos downstairs. Sometimes all you need to restore your state of mind is a gentle breeze and some peace and quiet. Just as I was about to close the window and head back, I heard a faint noise. Footsteps on the roof shingles. That didn't make any sense though. Was I going crazy? Curious, I climbed out onto the roof. In all honesty, there was probably a 0% chance I would have done that if I had been sober. I slowly stood up and looked around. In the moonlight, I saw something terrifying. There were 2 masked figures with bags emerging from another window. It dawned on me. Randy's house was being robbed. I started panicking. Should I shout? Confront them? Then a more pressing question hit me. What if they were armed? In my clumsy state of disbelief, I slipped and scuffed one of the shingles pretty loudly. One of the burglars heard it and jolted his head in my direction. Our eyes briefly met, and I froze. He nudged his partner, and the 2 of them quickly started making their way across the roof. Adrenaline surged through me. I couldn't let them get away. Randy had been so welcoming, and I felt a surge of loyalty. I decided to act. I quietly followed the burglars across the roof, keeping a safe distance. They headed towards a sloping part of the roof for an easier escape. As they climbed down, I pulled out my phone to dial 911, but fumbled in my drunken state, dropping it. The phone clattered loudly and the burglars turned sharply. "Who's there?" one of them hissed. Heart pounding, I ducked and scanned my surroundings, spotting a loose roof shingle. Without thinking, I grabbed it and hurled it towards them. It missed, but the noise startled them, causing one to lose his footing. He tumbled down the roof, crashing into the gutter before falling to the ground. The other burglar, now panicked, leaped to a neighboring tree and scrambled down. I rushed to the edge of the roof and saw the fallen burglar, groaning on the ground. I needed to alert everyone. As I turned to head back, I heard sirens. Someone else must have called the cops. I stumbled back into the attic room and made my way downstairs, trying to appear calm. The party was still in full swing, oblivious to the drama outside. I found Randy laughing and chatting with guests. "Randy, you need to call the police. There's been a robbery. I saw the burglars on the roof," I said. Randy's face turned from amusement to shock. "Are you serious?" he said. As he hurried to make the call, I explained what happened. The party mood shifted from celebration to concern. Apparently, one of Randy's neighbors had coincidentally already called the police to file a noise complaint, which was an incredibly ironic turn of good fortune. When they arrived, I recounted my story, leading them to the injured burglar. The man was arrested, but his partner had fled. The party ended abruptly. People started scattering and the lights got flipped on. I tried my best to act sober, but even after all that happened, I was still stumbling a bit. Randy thanked me profusely, still in disbelief. As for me, I was just glad I could help, despite the bizarre and terrifying circumstances. Looking back, I still can't really explain why the burglars would have chosen a house having a party to rob, but maybe they had prior knowledge of the house and knew no one would be upstairs. I figured that would be the end of the story, but fast forward a few months, I've got quite the update. I was playing video games at Philip's house one night when he got a call from Randy, who invited us over for a few beers. Up until that point, I hadn't actually realized the two of them were that close. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up to Randy's house was the front door and every window in sight were completely different. Was I not remembering his house right? I could have sworn the windows and the front door had been white, but they were all gray and much more heavy-duty looking. Randy waved us in and we went down to his basement. We cracked a few beers and started playing a game of pool. To my surprise, he actually recognized me from the party and thanked me again for my trouble. What he told us was actually crazy though. Apparently, the burglar the police caught that night refused to snitch on his partner and was currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. The police hadn't been able to get any leads into catching the other guy though. Randy told us that not even a week after the incident happened, his family started receiving threatening letters from an unknown sender, some of which included pictures of Randy and his family members. Obviously, they reported these occurrences, but the police had no real leads. A month after that, Randy's mom noticed a suspicious vehicle circling the house at like 1 a.m. And a few days later, Randy's dad claimed that things in their backyard had been gone through and moved around. In response, Randy's dad upped their home security a degree and even went as far as to replace and reinforce all their doors and windows. I was shocked. This was still an ongoing issue for Randy, and I had no idea how serious a situation like this could get. Summer's fast approaching, and I'm sure I'll have another update when I see Randy again. This happened to me a couple of weeks ago, and despite what I want to believe, I think it's still an ongoing issue. I don't exactly live in the woods, but my house is on the outskirts of what I'd call a nature-filled suburb. Lots of trees, wildlife, and that sort of thing. One side of our house borders what I guess you could call a small woods, though it's more accurate to describe it as a wooded patch, since it's only about a quarter mile from our property to the neighboring road on the other side. That road leads up and connects to another street, and on the other side of that road is this massive body of water that I've always been curious about. Growing up, I assumed it was some kind of reservoir, since there are tons of no trespassing signs and government property signs posted all along the fence surrounding it. But here's the weird thing. The name of this supposed reservoir isn't listed on Google Maps or Apple Maps, which it definitely would be if it were an actual reservoir. I always found that kind of strange. I've looked it up multiple times over the years and never found any official information on it, but its presence has definitely been an interesting topic of conversation among my siblings and I. I'm on varsity cross country for my school, so I'm always looking for good places to run. That wooded area has become my go-to route because it's exactly a 2-mile loop, through that patch of woods, along that road by the water, then back around. It's way quieter than running in my actual neighborhood, which doesn't have sidewalks and has these twisty roads with terrible visibility where people drive way too fast. The season was fast approaching, so I had recently ramped up my runs. The day everything went down, I could have sworn I heard some rustling behind me as I was making my way back through the woods after my run, but I figured it was probably just an animal. Fast forward to that night. During the summer, I always sleep with my windows open. I love the sounds of nature at night, especially when it rains. And boy, did it rain that night. A few hours after getting back home, a massive thunderstorm erupted out of nowhere. It was glorious. I was lying in bed, listening to the rain and thunder, when I started drifting off. That's when I heard something that definitely wasn't part of the storm. It was soft at first, but it didn't go away. It was this soft sobbing or crying sound, and the more I listened, the more it sounded like it was coming from right beneath my bedroom window, and the more distinctly human it sounded. As if there was any doubt as to whether the sound could have been the result of the storm, a soft female voice cut through the raindrops. It said, clear as day, "Can you help me? I'm cold." I've never moved so fast in my life. It was like my primal instincts took over before fear could freeze me in place. I burst out of bed, ran to the front door, and sprinted around the side of the house toward my bedroom window. The rain was pelting so hard I was soaked within seconds, but I didn't care. I needed to do something. As scary as hearing that voice was, it had never occurred to me that something sinister was going on. My only thought was that someone was genuinely in danger, and as soon as I turned the corner, there she was. Huddled right underneath my window was a woman wearing white clothing, maybe a nightgown or a dress, and she was crouching like she was trying to stay under the small overhang of my window. I approached her cautiously and asked if she needed help. The whole situation felt like a fever dream, but then things went from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds. As soon as she noticed me, she sprang up and rushes straight at me with a surge of energy I hadn't expected. Without much time to react, I braced myself for contact, but mid-stride, she seemed to hesitate. Maybe she noticed how tall I am, I can't say for sure. But instead of engaging me, she deviated from her collision course and veered off towards the woods. I stood there in shock as she disappeared into the darkness, running impossibly fast for someone with no shoes on. I didn't follow her. I immediately went back inside, still dripping from head to toe, and I woke my dad up. When I told him what happened, he was just as freaked out as I was. We went around and made sure every door and window in the house was locked. We talked about calling the police, but it was already after midnight, and we figured that by the time they showed up, the woman would be long gone. Plus, searching those woods in a thunderstorm seemed like it would be pointless and potentially dangerous for whoever had to do it, if they even agreed to. So we decided to just deal with it in the morning if necessary. I managed to fall back asleep eventually, and the next couple of days were completely normal. My dad and I chalked the whole thing up to one of two potential explanations: a homeless person looking for shelter, or someone who was mid-mental break. But what happened that night wasn't the end of the ordeal. In fact, it was more like the beginning. Maybe a week after the initial incident, I was going on one of my usual runs. As I was making my way up to the connecting road, I happened to glance through the barbed wire fence at the water. To my surprise, there was actually movement down by the water's edge. I stopped running and looked more closely. There, sitting on the water's edge with her feet dangling in, was a woman. I froze in complete terror. I mean, how was she even there? The fence around that property doesn't have any holes that I've ever seen, and it's topped with barbed wire, not to mention the fact that it's like 10 feet tall to begin with. I must have made some kind of noise. Maybe I gasped or something, because even though I was pretty far away, she suddenly turned her head and looked directly at me. In that moment, there was no doubt in my mind that she was the same woman who had been underneath my bedroom window during that thunderstorm. The moment she saw me, she got up and ran toward the fence with this completely crazed look in her eyes. She pressed her face right against the chain link and just stood there smiling at me, and it was not a normal smile, I'm telling you. I yelled that I was calling the police, hoping that would scare her off, and I guess it did, because as soon as I said that, she turned and dove straight into the water. It was so unsettling and so unnatural that I felt unsafe just standing there. I called 911 immediately and tried to explain the situation. I tried to keep her in sight, but she swam out of view before the police showed up. When they finally did, they took my statement and said they'd investigate the area. They told me to go about my day normally, which I was kind of shocked by. I haven't seen her again since then, but I've started hearing noises outside my bedroom window at night. Not crying like the first time, but just general sounds of someone moving out there. It's making me really paranoid, and I just know something else is going to happen. I've actually been reluctant to go running because I don't want to run into her again. I get that she's probably psychotic and probably followed me home after a run one day, but what remains the biggest mystery to me is how she ended up on the other side of the fence. My sister and I have spent hours looking for a way in there. I'm telling you, it's impossible. My cousin Nick is one of those conspiracy theorist types, and he's convinced that there's something more to the reservoir that the government wants to hide, but I think that's ridiculous. Still, I've never felt more unsettled than my own home. I'll just go ahead and say it. I'm a middle-aged man in a failed marriage. My wife and I fight over everything. I can't really remember what my wife and I were fighting about this time. Probably something stupid. I ended up storming out of the house, something that happens all too often. Usually I just get a hotel room in a situation like this, but I didn't want her chasing after me, so I decided on a different option. I own a piece of property in the middle of nowhere that I've been meaning to repurpose. I think it used to be a shooting range or something like that. I honestly don't know. The previous owner died, and his estate just wanted to get rid of it. The building itself is this weird concrete block structure with a few warehouse-type rooms downstairs and an office area upstairs. It's actually pretty big, despite being only a few rooms. I figured I'd spend the night there. There was no way she'd be able to find me. I drove the 20 minutes through the increasingly desolate roads, and about halfway there, I noticed dark clouds building up. By the time I got there, I could hear thunder rumbling in the distance. I parked in what used to be a parking lot just as the first drops of rain started falling. I keep a spare set of keys hidden behind a loose piece of siding, which I was able to locate pretty easily. By the time I got settled, the storm had really picked up. The building has metal roofing, and the rain was coming down hard enough that it sounded like someone was dumping gravel on the roof. There's a decently comfortable cot in what I assume used to be the office on the second floor. That's where I'd be sleeping. Once I got settled, I finally felt some peace for the first time in weeks, despite the storm outside. Actually, the sound of the rain was kind of soothing. It made the place feel completely cut off from the world. But of course, nice things never last. Not for me, at least. The moment I started getting drowsy, I was ripped back to reality when the sound of shattering glass broke through the noise of the storm. My heart immediately started pounding. I lay there for maybe 30 seconds, listening over the drumming of rain on the metal roof, trying to figure out what direction the sound had come from. I keep a hunting rifle in one of the adjacent rooms there, mostly so my wife doesn't know I own it. So I grabbed it as quietly as I could and started making my way down the stairs. I stood there at the bottom of the stairwell, listening for something other than the sounds of rain, but there was nothing. Complete silence except for the storm. I decided to search the entire building methodically. I went room by room, rifle ready, checking every closet and corner. In the back room, I found what I was looking for. One of the boarded up windows had a hole punched through it, with glass scattered on the floor inside, but that was it. There were no signs of entry, and despite the window being shattered, there wasn't enough room for someone to fit through it. Still though, I was paranoid to my core. I spent another 20 minutes examining the property, but I couldn't find anything that even remotely looked out of place. I figured it was probably just vandals who threw a rock through the window and took off when they heard it break. I found some cardboard in one of the other rooms and taped it over the hole, then went back upstairs. I kept the rifle next to the cot just in case, but I was pretty convinced whoever it was had already left. I'm not sure how long I'd been lying there, maybe an hour, when I heard what I thought were footsteps moving below me. It was hard to tell over the rain, but it sounded like someone walking slowly, trying to move quietly under the cover of the storm noise. I again grabbed the rifle and crept to the top of the stairs, this time not risking alerting the intruder by walking down. The footsteps had stopped though, but there was no way they could have heard me. I waited there like a statue for maybe 5 minutes, feeling beads of sweat start forming on my forehead. I ended up searching the place again, but again there was nothing. I started wondering if I was imagining things or if whoever had been there had snuck out before I noticed them. That didn't explain how all the doors were still locked though. This time, I went outside into the pouring rain and searched the perimeter with my phone's flashlight. There were no vehicles nearby or any signs that someone had been there. It was starting to freak me out. Part of me wished I'd find something just to assure myself I wasn't going crazy. I went back upstairs and tried to rationalize what I heard. Between the rain on the metal roof and the general creaking that old buildings do during storms, there were a dozen explanations for sounds that might seem like footsteps. I tried to focus on getting some sleep, telling myself I was being paranoid, but that wasn't the end of it. Before I could even settle in again, I heard what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor below me. This was different, not something that could be explained by the storm. The unmistakable sound of something heavy being pushed or pulled across concrete is not something a storm could create, not in a million years. This time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the rifle and stormed downstairs, flipping on every light switch I could find. I was getting angry now, which was probably better than being scared. I yelled out into the darkness that I wasn't messing around, that I was armed, and that I wasn't afraid to defend myself or my property. My voice echoed through the empty rooms, and then died away into silence. Nothing had been moved, and no one answered me. You might be wondering why I didn't call the police at that point. It was partly because I wasn't sure what I'd tell them, but mostly because the property isn't completely up to code, and that's putting it generously. The last thing I needed was to bring official attention to the place, but standing there in that empty building, rifle in hand, yelling into the darkness, something suddenly shifted. In an instant, my frustrated anger transformed into pure, cold fear. It was more than just a changing attitude. It was like something icy washed over me. I could feel it, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get as far away from that place as possible. I don't know what triggered it exactly, but I knew I had to leave. I quickly gathered my things, returned the rifle to its hiding place, and turned off all the lights. The storm was still raging outside, but I didn't care. I locked up the building and drove back home through the worst of the weather. It's been a little while since that happened, but I plan to go back in a few days, or whenever I have time really. I want to go back and investigate. Maybe install some kind of security system to see if anything's actually happening there, or if it was just my imagination. As far as what actually happened that night, I have no idea. Either someone was actually there and was able to hide from me, or I'm starting to lose my mind. I don't know which is scarier, and I really don't want to think about any kind of third possibility, because that scares me even more. My name is Jason. I live in a pretty rural area where you have to drive at least half an hour to get to anywhere interesting. This happened to me 3 Fridays ago. My buddy Leo and I had driven out to this house party a few towns over. It wasn't a big banger or anything, just one of those chill gatherings where people hang out in someone's backyard playing beer pong and listening to music. A little college-y to be honest, but there's not much to do around my neck of the woods if I'm being real. I was the DD that night, so I'd been nursing the same beer for like 3 hours while Leo was doing his usual thing, getting progressively louder and more philosophical as the night went on. He was pretty plastered by the time we left around 1 a.m., which was funny up until I realized I'd become his de facto babysitter. After finally dragging him away from the girl he was flirting with, I ushered him into my car to make the 20-something minute drive back home. The weather had gotten pretty nasty while we were at the party though. What started as a somewhat refreshing drizzle had become a torrential downpour that made it hard to see more than 30 feet ahead. I had to slow down to like 30 on roads I'd normally tear through at like 60. Leo kept complaining, first about my driving, then about the music, and finally about how badly he needed to piss. I told him we were 15 minutes from home max, but he kept going on about it. His tantrum was becoming insufferable, so after another 5 minutes of him whining, I gave up. I pulled over on this random stretch of road next to what looked like cornfields, though it was hard to tell in the dark and rain. We were literally in the middle of nowhere, no houses visible, no streetlights, just farmland on both sides of the road. I told him he could go ahead and get soaked for all I care, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't listening because he was already halfway out the car before I was even finished talking. He practically fell out of the passenger seat and stumbled off toward the field, disappearing within seconds. The rain was coming down hard enough that I could barely see him once he got 10 feet away. The literal moment he staggered out of sight, I remember I had an umbrella in my back seat. I sat there for a minute with the engine running, but then figured I might as well take advantage of the stop too. So I grabbed my umbrella, locked the door out of habit, and walked off in the opposite direction from where Leo had gone. I found a spot maybe 20 yards from the car, right at the edge of where the gravel met the crops. As I was standing there, I could have sworn I heard something rustling back near the car, something other than the deafening sounds of the storm. Without altering my stance, I looked back over my shoulder toward the car, but didn't see anything. I had the keys in my pocket and knew I locked the car, so I didn't think much of it. I finished up and headed back, surprised to find that Leo wasn't standing by the car yet. A few minutes passed, then 5, then another 5. Still no Leo though. I was getting pissed. What should have been a quick 20-minute drive home was turning into this whole 45-minute ordeal, and I had to be up early the next morning. I was about to honk the horn when I saw movement in the side mirror. Leo was sprinting toward the passenger door, and even through the rain and darkness, I could tell something was wrong. The second he got in, before he even had the door closed, he was screaming at me to drive. As if some kind of survival instinct activated in me, I pulled out of there as fast as I could, but with the rain and all, it wasn't like I could speed. Leo started explaining that while he was doing his business, he saw what he thought was me somewhere to his right. The person started walking deeper into the field, and Leo, in his drunk logic, thought I was messing with him, or maybe that I was drunker than I'd let on, so he followed. He said he followed for a while, not entirely sure what I was doing and too drunk to analyze the situation properly. Eventually, the figure turned around, and Leo realized it definitely wasn't me. He said he couldn't make out any details in the darkness, but it was clearly someone else. The whole explanation took maybe 30 seconds, but before he could even finish talking, I felt the car start drifting sharply to the right, and then came the unmistakable sound of a flat tire. It was literally a worst-case scenario. Continuing the drive was not an option. The car was pulling way too much. Reluctantly, I pulled over. We were maybe half a mile from where we'd originally stopped. Not close enough for it to be an immediate danger, but not exactly far enough for me to feel comfortable. I snapped at Leo to get out of the car and help me out, since he was responsible for landing us in this mess. But when I walked around the car to inspect the flat, my anger at Leo became fear. Pure fear. There, lodged in the sidewall of my rear passenger tire, was a screwdriver. There was about a 0% chance that it happened coincidentally. Someone had jammed it in there, and with force too, judging from how deep the puncture was. Leo started freaking out, but I snapped at him to get it together. The two of us rushed to change the tire, which was especially nerve-wracking in the pouring rain. I didn't want to think about who had sabotaged my car or why, but with every passing second, my hands got shakier and shakier. I felt like someone was going to catch up to us at any moment. The fear was so sickening, I actually started feeling nauseous, which is something that no nightmare can ever match. I was finishing tightening up the last lug nuts when all of a sudden, a scream rang out from somewhere behind us. It was clearly a woman's scream, which made the situation 10 times scarier since the person Leo claimed to have seen was a man. I threw the tools in the trunk, ditched the tire, and got back in the car as fast as I could. But as I was pulling away, Leo started tugging my arm, saying that we had to go back because someone was in trouble. I told him there was no way I was going back, even though a part of me felt like I was making the wrong decision. Leo called 911 as I drove away, giving the operator our location, or as close as he could figure it. Leo was furious with me the whole ride home, saying someone could be dying back there, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the car around. I was just too afraid. I didn't say much until we were pulling into my driveway, trying to ignore Leo calling me out for being a coward and whatnot. Instead of dropping Leo off, the two of us sat in my driveway to try and make sense of everything. Leo was convinced that the scream came from someone who was being attacked or stalked by the person he'd seen, and he felt guilty that we had just driven away instead of helping. But I wasn't so sure about that theory. If someone was out there doing something sinister to another person, why would they ever draw attention to themselves by puncturing a passing car's tire? To me, that seemed like the last thing you'd want to do if you were trying to hurt someone without being caught. Plus, if there really were a woman in trouble, she would have been able to see our car and headlights when we first pulled over. Why wait until after we had driven off to call for help? It didn't make any sense, and as I was explaining my rationale to Leo, I finally felt that I could vocalize what had, until then, just been a gut feeling telling me to get out of there. The scream must have been part of some kind of trap, like maybe there were multiple people out there. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility. But even that theory doesn't make much sense, which writing this all out is making me realize. Actually, that theory sounds equally as absurd. Who in their right mind would stop their car on that random road at that hour of the night? There's no way someone could have hatched a plot to lure a traveler out of their car there, in the pouring rain no less. Leo and I argued back and forth about it for a while, ultimately agreeing to disagree. I called the police station the next morning to see if they had found anything, but they said their officers had searched the area and found no evidence of anyone being there. Even more strangely, they hadn't found my tire either, which threw yet another wrinkle into things. Although I guess it's possible they just weren't looking in the right place. A few days later, Leo suggested that maybe it was actually the woman, not the man, who had punctured my tire, maybe trying to draw our attention. Why they would do that instead of scream, I have no idea. The whole thing honestly has no explanation that sits right with me, but I really don't want to think about what it would mean if Leo's right. If there really had been someone in trouble out there whose fate I sealed by driving away. Hopefully I don't dox myself by writing this, but I'm a graffiti artist, or as some might see it, a delinquent. I'm fine with either title. Point is, I like to spray paint, and I'm decent with a can in my hand. The tagging community is atrocious. People aren't friendly, and there's no respect between artists. Because of this, I've adopted a much more inconspicuous routine. I like tagging up quieter spots, where my art likely won't be seen by other artists or the general public. Old train lines are usually a good bet, since the train cars are endless and new trains get decommissioned and left to rot on them all the time. My friend Lucas likes to come with me when I tag up, even though he's not big into the whole thing himself. I welcome the company. Some people don't understand the importance of a good friend, and I think that's sad. Most of my other friends don't seem to respect my time or interests as much as he seems to. Lucas and I found ourselves smoking on some nameless set of old tracks I found earlier that day on Google Maps. I'm not a big stoner myself, but he smokes a lot of weed, so I often indulge to match his vibe. It wasn't that late, maybe a little past 10 p.m. We finished a J and talked as we walked alongside the old, rusty freight train. Oddly enough, there wasn't a single tag on the entire train. It must have been recently moved here, I thought, excited that I'd get first dibs on such a good surface. I tossed Lucas a can for him to mess around with, and I started doing my own thing. About 5 minutes later, I finished my first tag. I admired it for a bit before moving to the next car, then the next. About 15 minutes and 2 paint cans later, I had 3 decent tags up adjacent to one another, and I was pretty proud of myself for how they looked in combination with each other. Sorry in advance if this offends anyone, but I tend to discard my empty cans wherever they go dry. So I flung them back the way we had come, enjoying the satisfying clattering sound a ball bearing makes when bouncing around the inside of an empty can. I then caught up with Lucas, who had seemingly rolled and lit another joint, neglecting the paint I had given him. For context, the reason I'm not a big stoner is because I started getting unbearable anxiety highs much more frequently, maybe 90% of the time. In hindsight, smoking 2 J's with Lucas was a borderline detrimental decision. After all, we were doing something illegal, which was already pretty anxiety-inducing. I smoked the second joint anyway, confident that I'd be okay. As soon as the final sparks floated off the J, that's when we heard it. A muffled clang from somewhere behind us rang out into the night. The two of us froze and stared into the darkness. I could feel droplets of sweat forming around my neck as adrenaline began coursing through me. I couldn't tell if the sound had come from outside of the train or from inside one of the cars. It was hard to tell which option was worse. We waited for a full minute in silence, and nothing. That's when I whipped out my phone and recorded this video.
Bro, what the fuck was that? No way, bro. You fucking heard that? I heard that shit, bro. What the fuck? No, bro. Ah, fuck.
As the video shows, whoever made that noise picked up one of my empty paint cans and threw it at us, before chasing and shouting at us. You can't really see the paint can in the video, but I swear to you, that's what the first sound was. As we frantically made our escape, whoever was behind us yelled, "You better not trip, boy." A few seconds later, an actual gunshot sounded off behind us, almost causing Lucas to trip and fall. It startled me so much that my finger slipped off the record button on Snapchat and the video cut out. We bolted down the tracks until they intersected a main road and didn't stop running until we were a safe distance away. I don't think I've ever been more terrified in my entire life. It didn't help that I was stoned out of my mind. My hands were literally shaking. So were Lucas's. We found our way back to the car and drove home in silence. What was I supposed to do? Call the police? I was literally breaking the law. That wasn't an option. The story doesn't end there, though. I actually went back to those tracks a few weeks later, but this time during the day and equipped with my trusty Glock 17. To my surprise, the train was still there. Despite that, there was a pretty glaring difference this time around. In the 3 spots where my tags had previously been were now ugly blotches of red paint. Someone had deliberately covered my work. Quietly, I kept investigating and eventually came to a train car with its door wide open. I took a look inside, and it was bizarre. The train car was completely empty, except for a chair in the direct center and what looked like ropes and chains scattered about. Some of the ropes were wrapped around the legs of the chair, and others were just lying on the floor. The weirdest part was the smell, though. The whole car smelled like bleach. If you closed your eyes, you would have guessed you were in a cleaning supply closet. I can't overstate the smell, though. It literally smelled like the whole train car had been doused in bleach. I went to take a picture of the scene when I thought I heard a metal clang somewhere further down the train. I could have imagined it, but I wasn't taking any chances. That was enough for me. I was out of there as quickly as I had come. I've told so many people this story, and none of them could rationalize that psycho's actions in a way that makes sense. I doubt a homeless person would be able to get their hands on a gun, but I can't fathom why someone other than a homeless person would respond so aggressively, and why they decided to cover up my tags is another mystery. I think the most disturbing aspect of this whole thing was the chair in the middle of the train car. I really want to go back to those tracks just to take a picture of what I saw, but I haven't worked up the courage to. I have no idea if whoever was there that night was really shooting to kill us or just trying to scare us. But sometimes, late at night, when it's just me and my thoughts, I can still hear that shot ringing in my ears. As I'm writing this, it's early July. This story took place at the beginning of summer. I usually try to hang around my college town or travel to Europe in the summer as a way to avoid going home, but that wasn't a possibility this time around. I found myself reluctantly returning home at the beginning of the summer. I just had to make it through 1 week, and then I'd be on a plane to Germany. I didn't really feel like seeing any of my old friends, but I wasn't too keen on staying home either, so I found myself waking up early and spending my entire days hiking, watching movies, or even just driving around aimlessly. It was my last day home. I was getting bored of the stuff I had been doing and wanted to do something a little more exciting. My friends and I used to train hop, one of the many unruly activities that I had since cut out of my life. I decided what the hell and drove to a secluded set of tracks I knew about. Freight trains always passed through here, so I knew there would be many options. The tracks were surrounded by trees and various flora, part of the reason I had chosen them. The last thing I needed was to be caught for doing an illegal activity after having been clean for so many years. I parked my car and made my way over to the tracks. Let me describe the layout so it's easy to understand. This specific set of tracks ran through the trees for a while before entering a tunnel. There was a very small clearing on the other side of the tunnel and then a massive bridge over the water. My friends and I used to ride the train all the way across the bridge, but since it was just me, I would have no way of getting back to my car unless I felt like walking 10 miles. So I decided that I'd hop on the train and take it through the tunnel, hop off, and get a peaceful walk back to my car. I walked along the tracks and waited for a train to pass. It was probably 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Finally, after about 10 minutes of walking, I started to feel the familiar vibration in the rails. I quickly ran to the side and tried my best to stay out of sight. Usually, as far as I know, freight train conductors didn't care enough to report people walking along the tracks, but I didn't want to take any chances. The train passed, and I waited for a good amount of cars to go by before emerging from my hiding spot. I picked a car that looked easily attainable and began jogging alongside the train like I had done 100 times before. Once I was confident enough, I grabbed hold of the ladder and swung myself up. It was pretty easy. The train wasn't traveling very quickly. As my part of the train was about to enter the tunnel, I saw a strange flash of light from up ahead. I assumed it was a spark from the train or something, but truth be told, I had never seen anything like it before. I hoped there wasn't an errant wire or something dangerous in the tunnel, but it was too late to hop off. The train started picking up speed since the tunnel was perfectly straight, and I closed my eyes as the adrenaline rush started coming on. Just then, I felt a hand reach out from the darkness and literally grab my leg. I lost my footing and nearly slipped, but my hands were firmly gripping the train. I screamed and kicked, but the train sped by before I could make contact with anything. Before I could even comprehend what just happened, I felt another hand slap against my leg. I screamed again before scrambling up the ladder, hopefully out of reach. My heart was racing. What the hell just happened? The train exited the tunnel, and I hopped off without thinking. I waited for the train to completely pass and watched it chug over the bridge. I remember pacing back and forth in the little clearing, thinking about what just happened. Like, were there really people in the tunnel, and what could they possibly be doing there? Why the hell would they try to drag me down? All of these thoughts and more were racing through my mind when a stark realization struck me in the face. The only way back to my car was through the tunnel. There was absolutely no chance in hell I was walking back through that tunnel with those people in there, especially since they'd be able to see my silhouette and I'd be walking through darkness. I sat on the ground for what felt like forever. There was no other option. I couldn't walk across the bridge without risking my life. A train could come along at any second and the bridge was too long. I considered calling someone to come rescue me, but I wasn't even sure if they'd be able to do anything. Police weren't an option. I was breaking the law just being here. I had no choice. I picked up a rock and started making my way through the tunnel. There were 2 people in there, which I knew for a fact, but there could have been more. I had no idea. I got about halfway to the point where I felt the second set of hands when I heard something. A faint clicking was coming from somewhere in the tunnel. It sounded like a human clicking their tongue, but it could have been made by a machine. It was honestly hard to tell. I froze and thought to myself, continuing to walk this tunnel was a death sentence. I felt a rush of confidence and pulled out my phone. "You better stay back or I'll shoot," I threatened, my words echoing off the tunnel walls. There was a moment of silence. The clicking stopped as quickly as it had begun. I was obviously bluffing about having a gun, but I figured it was better to bluff than just walk in silence. I then pulled up a video on YouTube of a gunshot sound effect, turned up my phone's volume, and played it. It was honestly louder than I was expecting, and with the echo of the tunnel, I prayed to God that whoever was in there bought it. Without waiting another second, I sprinted full speed into the darkness, bracing myself for a fight. I didn't stop running until I had reached the other side. By some miracle, no one tried to grab me. After making it out of the tunnel, I looked back. There was another flash from deep in the tunnel. This time, though, it subsided long enough for me to clearly see 2 silhouettes standing on the tracks facing me. That was it for me. I turned to leave, but as I was jogging away, the nastiest screech I've ever heard emanated from the tunnel. It sounded barbaric, definitely human, but far from normal. I don't plan on ever train hopping again. The New York City subway system is a scary place. I've been an MTA worker for 7 years, and nothing really surprises me anymore. When friends and family ask if I have any stories, though, there is one that stands out among the rest, one that I can't explain. This happened to me about 2 years into the job, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was pretty acclimated to everything at that point, and things had become routine. I was stationed in Brooklyn at the time, and I was doing some routine maintenance in High Street Station. There wasn't a soul on the platform. It was actually kind of eerie. You're used to these subway stations overflowing with people, so seeing them empty and almost deserted looking was a strange adjustment to make. I hadn't seen a person on the platform in hours, and it was dead silent except for the buzz of the lights and the occasional passing train. Out of nowhere, I heard a clang from somewhere down the track. It startled me so badly that I dropped my mop in shock. The sound wasn't something I was used to hearing. The best way I could describe it to you is that sound that a rock would make if it had been dropped on a metal rail. I stopped what I was doing and looked into the tunnel, listening for other noises. After a while, I concluded that whatever I heard had either been caused by an animal or a falling piece of cement. After all, these stations were pretty old. I went back to work, not thinking too much about the sound. About 10 minutes later, the same sound shook me from my concentration, only this time it was probably about twice as loud. This time, I actually became a little concerned, dare I say scared. Was it really possible that 2 chunks of the ceiling had fallen in the span of 10 minutes? I put down my supplies and walked over to the tunnel entrance, trying to be quiet. I peered into the darkness and couldn't really see anything. I debated whether or not it was a good idea to call out into the tunnel, and ultimately decided against it. I still figured it was nothing, but after the initial fear had worn off, I was more confused than anything. I kept trying to think of things that could make it sound like that, not once, but twice. It was especially bizarre since the second sound was louder. I tried to keep my mind off the sounds and went back to work, finding a good rhythm again. I was almost done with my work on this platform and was pleased that I'd get to leave this weird station soon. As I was wrapping things up, I heard something that gave me the chills. A child's voice called out for help from inside the tunnel, and he sounded like he was in distress. I instantly stopped what I was doing and made my way over to the edge of the platform. I hesitated for a few seconds before deciding that a child in anguish wasn't something my moral conscience would allow me to ignore. I walked down the steps leading onto the tracks and waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I shouted into the tunnel, asking that kid if he was okay. No response. That's weird, I thought, starting to feel nervous about this encounter. Just then, the kid's voice rang out again, repeating his call for help. I yelled back, asking him if he could hear me. He responded yes, and I asked where specifically he was. There was a brief moment of silence before he just said, "In front of you. Just keep walking." I really didn't want to, but couldn't just leave some helpless kid all alone on those tracks. It was dangerous. I began walking forward when something dawned on me. I yelled into the darkness one more time, this time asking the kid what was wrong. An uncomfortable pause again before the kid responded, "Just keep walking." I didn't like that. This whole thing was off. My eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, and I was able to slightly make out what was in front of me. There actually was what looked like the shadow of a kid just up the tracks, but there was something else that almost made me scream in fear. Another shadow, this one much taller, obviously an adult. My blood ran cold, and I stopped in place. This wasn't happening to me. As slowly as I could, I turned around and made my way back to the platform. Luckily, I wasn't chased on the way back. The kid shouted, "Wait, where are you going?" once I reached the platform, but I wasn't sticking around another second. I made my way up the stairs and called the police as soon as I got cell service. I told them everything, and police were swarming the platform in a matter of minutes. I waited to see what they turned up. After about 20 minutes of searching, they did find something chilling. There was a single kid's shoe just lying in the tunnel, which the police hypothesized could have signified a struggle. After hours more of searching and scouring every available database for missing children, we were told we'd receive a call if anything ever came up. It was concluded that whoever had been down there, though, had hidden somewhere in the tunnels. I have no idea what to think of this experience. This is the best theory I can come up with. Some psycho kidnapped a child and forced him to yell for help in an attempt to lure some unsuspecting Good Samaritan into a trap. Or hell, maybe it's their own kid who they're raising to also be a psycho. I can't think of any other reasonable explanation besides this one, but if I'm right, I can only imagine what that kid must be going through. If you want to listen to these stories plus some exclusive ones on your favorite apps, all of them are available to listen to on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. Just click the link in the description or at the end of the video. There's an abandoned motel called the Royal Hawaiian Motel. It's been abandoned for, I'm pretty sure, well over a decade. I do a lot of solo urban exploration, sometimes at night. The Royal Hawaiian Motel is located in Baker, California, and during the day it gets scorching hot, too hot to be walking around with my backpack. So I chose to go to the motel during the night. It was very easy to get to. I parked on the side of the road and walked over. There really was no fence or anything to hop over, and there was no security. It was one of the easier structures to get to that I've explored for sure. In the back was a really deep pool with a ton of graffiti. I shined my flashlight up at the actual motel, and I noticed half of the upstairs room's doors were slid open slightly or just completely shattered. Kinda creepy looking, but also expected since the place had been abandoned for so long. Of course, other people have explored there. A part of the motel also looked like it had been engulfed in flames and partially burnt down. I looked around the outside for a little while. It was late at night, so there were no sounds of nearby passing traffic. Besides the sounds of my shoes stepping over various pieces of debris, at one point, my blood ran cold when I heard a voice from somewhere in the vicinity. It sounded like a female's voice. My first instinct in these scenarios is to assume it's some kind of security worker or somebody who may cause trouble for me, so I typically tend to walk out of sight and hide. That's what I did. I ran to one of the other rooms on the ground level and turned off my flashlight. I waited just a minute, and after hearing nothing, I turned it back on. I looked around this little room I was in, and the walls were littered with graffiti. There was only one piece of furniture in here. It was a little dresser with like 4 drawers on it, and then some dusty, dirty old mattress on the floor. I wondered if homeless people would come and sleep here, but honestly, it's just so far away from any real civilization that I doubted it. I left the room and continued around the motel. I would peek inside every little opening on the ground floor below the overhead walkway for the upper level rooms. Each room was pretty similar to the last, with different miscellaneous graffiti and writings on the walls and old dilapidated furniture. Then I heard a crash type sound from above, like something falling over. I felt my heart skip a beat. I went back outside and pointed my flashlight up at the walkway above, at the broken glass doors. I felt a rush as I decided to go up there and check out the rooms. What I felt like deep down was that there was an animal in one of the rooms, but there's always that chance that you run into other explorers or perhaps a homeless person in places like this. I made my way upstairs and peeked into each room that I passed. They were all similarly furnished, with junk, debris, old mattresses, and odd pieces of old furniture. As I walked further down the walkway, a banging sound became audible. It got louder as I continued to walk. It was a consistent, slow banging, like thump, 2 seconds, thump, 2 seconds, thump. Someone was here. I approached the door to the room I was positive that it was coming from. As I got closer, it stopped. Uh-oh. Maybe they heard my footsteps. I announced to whoever was in there that I'm just an explorer and I mean no harm. I peeked into the room with the flashlight now off. It was almost pitch black in there, but I'm 50% certain I saw the shape of a person a little further into the room by the back wall. The room smelled like straight feces. I pulled my head out from the room to look down at my flashlight and turn it on, but in a careful position to not point the light right into the room right away. I aimed it down at first at the floor, and then peered into the room again, and slowly pointed the light into the room. And I saw 2 pale bare feet approaching me fast. In a muscle jerk reaction, I pointed the light up more to fully reveal this woman with a bloodied forehead and yellow guck on her mouth which was hanging open. It was a sight from a nightmare. I was out of there so quick. I heard the woman screaming as I was running away, and her screams didn't get much further away, which told me she was chasing after me. I ran down the stairs and back outside. I ran the entire way back to my car. I wasn't followed this far. I called one of my good friends, George, who's also into urban exploration. I had invited him to come with me originally to this place, but he was unable to. I told him what just happened. We came to a weird and disturbing agreement that the thumping I was hearing was that woman banging her head on the wall, hence why her forehead was so bloody. When I asked if I should call the police, kind of just thinking out loud, he said definitely not, as I'd be admitting to trespassing. I actually drove around the immediate area by the Taco Bell and the few stores in the area, looking for a payphone so I could anonymously call the police about this deranged, dangerous woman. But obviously payphones are really a thing of the past, so it was just a pointless effort. What I ended up doing was calling the non-emergency number and reporting the deranged woman, but also claiming I was not the one to find her, rather I heard someone else had run into her. I was as vague as possible, and I hung up. Because I didn't want to stick around there, I don't know if the police eventually went to investigate, but whatever was wrong with that woman, she should have been in a psych ward or something. In all of my years of exploring, I'd never encountered anything like that. A few years ago, I lived in a small town. My family decided to move us 4 hours away to get away from all the drama. While my parents were out of town picking out houses, I brought my friend over and called up my cousins to take a little road trip. The place I wanted to go was pretty much off limits, but we were daredevils and wanted to experience something scary. We picked a place that was 2 to 3 hours away called Bryce Hospital. This place was supposedly haunted due to the history of it. It was a psychiatric facility where they would keep mentally ill people. There were rumors about how some of the patients were mistreated and tortured. As the population declined, they eventually shut down. Over the years, the building began rotting and succumbing to nature. We decided to leave around 11 p.m. so we could make it there by 2 a.m. The car ride was pretty fun, and we were all very pumped to see what we would find. We arrived around like 2:43 a.m. and stopped at the beginning of the dirt road that led to it. We sat there for a few minutes, contemplating if we should really do this or not, because we already had a bad feeling. After 10 minutes of staring at a dark road, we decided to go on. As we went down the road, it felt like it would never end. The grass was fully grown and there were branches everywhere. It was pitch black and we could barely even see the road. We finally made it to the building, and once we did, we all just stared in amazement. It was huge. The roof was rotted off and vines were growing all over the walls. In the middle of the parking lot, or what was once the parking lot, had a giant old water fountain that also had vines growing from the sides. It was so dark we could only see with the headlights illuminated. We turned the car off and got out. We began walking into the building, and the first thing I noticed was pentagrams sprayed all over the walls. We kept walking farther in, and made our way up the stairs, which was very hard considering they were practically non-existent. We climbed a ladder and got onto what was left of the roof. We looked around, and noticed a light in the front of the building. It looked like a phone light. We called out, but nobody answered, and the light vanished as quickly as it appeared. My cousin told us to follow him into another room so he could make sure we were safe, but I had a terrible feeling. I wandered off into another room that was right beside the room they were in. I looked around and saw old mattresses and more graffiti. I heard my cousins talking when all of a sudden, I heard a faint sound. It was like someone threw a rock at the window of the room I was in. I didn't think anything of it and kept looking around. I met back up with my cousins and friend. We decided to go to the basement to check it out. Once we got down there, we had to take a break because it was difficult getting to the bottom due to the stairs being smashed. We sat there catching our breath until we heard a voice from the back of the room. We all paused, looking at each other. I was too afraid to move, fearing whatever was in there would come after me. My cousin walked back there slowly and shined his light around. As the light reached the far end of the room, he saw someone squatted, looking towards the wall. My cousin began backing up slowly with the light still on the guy. Once he got back to where we were, he lifted us out and began pulling himself out. Once we were out, he yelled to the man, asking if he was okay. The man turned around and stared blankly at us. There was a moment of silence before the man let out wild screams. He began running towards us. We all started screaming and running away. We had no idea where to run, but ended up climbing out of the window. We ended up in the woods behind the building. I remember running and screaming because I heard the man right behind me. My cousins were far ahead of me, and I saw their flashlights slowly fading. I ran into so many trees that my entire body started to ache. I finally caught up to them in a clearing. We found a trail and started trying to find our way back to the car, but we ended up going the wrong direction for an hour and decided to turn back and try the other direction. It was a grueling way back, but we finally saw the building again and sighed with relief knowing we weren't far from the car. As we approached the car, we heard rustling in one of the bushes by the building, and like before, a rock flew out and hit my friend. We saw the man emerge from the bush, and we had to make a run for the car. As we were running, the man was a decent length behind us to where we could open the doors and lock them once we got in. We started up the car, and when we did, the headlights turned on, only to show the man running towards us. He started banging on the windows with a glass bottle. We put it in drive and took off out of there. The whole entire time we were heading home, we sat in silence. I think we all felt the same sense of shock. My body was shaking. After that night, we never had any interest in urban exploring ever again. This happened in the countryside of Georgia. I was 15 at the time with my brother Seb, who was 18. Seb was big on exploring creepy places, and he somehow heard of this huge abandoned house not far from us from someone he knew. I guess he didn't want to explore it alone, so one day he brought me along with him to go check it out. Seb parked the car in a rather hidden location, covered by a bunch of trees. The house property wasn't visible from here. We'd have to walk down this concrete road that clearly hadn't been touched in forever. There were giant cracks with grass and weeds growing through it just about everywhere.
All the grass around the road was overgrown, almost overtaken with weeds as well. Suddenly, we noticed a woman down the road walking behind us in our direction. I asked Seb what we should do, and he said to just play it cool. If we started to run, it would look suspicious. The woman was walking with both her hands folded behind her back, as if she were going for a relaxing stroll. We kept walking at our regular pace, maybe picking it up a bit just slightly. I turned around once more, and she was much closer now, and I could see a smile on her face. She was looking back at me. Then she said, "Lovely day today, isn't it?" My brother and I simultaneously responded, "Yeah." She kept walking behind us, getting closer and closer. Then, as she was almost right on top of us, with her hands still folded behind her back, she said, "I have to go to bed now." Seb and I looked at one another with confused looks. We both picked up the pace now without saying a word to each other. We just saw in each other's faces that it was time to speed up and get away from this woman. My brother turned around one last time and said, "Have a great day, ma'am." We stayed in this speed walk pace for a while, and the next time we turned around, that woman was gone, completely off the road. That meant she must have taken off into the woods, which was incredibly creepy. It was absolutely a chilling start to this little field trip. We made it to the house. It was noticeably deteriorated. There were vines of ivy growing up certain parts of the walls. Some of the glass windows were shattered, meaning it had been explored before. And that's exactly how we entered the house, through one of the broken windows. We climbed in, making sure not to cut ourselves on any broken glass. Right from the start, surprisingly, there was a lot of stuff left behind, like all the furniture, albeit it looked a little worn out, all the wall decor, the little decorations on the coffee table. Even when we went into the kitchen and checked the fridge, there were food items left behind. Very rotten food items. Opening that fridge was like getting smacked in the face with the smell of death. After checking the whole first floor, we went down to the basement. The basement, like the first floor, was still completely furnished, although down here was a lot messier. There were a ton of things like loose sheets of paper and garbage spread out on the floor. The carpet was a faded blue color. There was a little bit of light that came into the room through the windows at the top of the walls. And then we heard a noise from upstairs. A distinct thump. We both just froze like statues, waiting for any kind of noise again. Within a few seconds, we chalked it up to just being a noise of an old, deteriorating house. There wasn't much else to see in the basement, so we went back up to the first floor, and the only place left to check was the upstairs. At the top of the stairs, from what I remember, was the bathroom directly in front of the stairs, and then to the left was a small hallway that led to an open door, and then the hallway cut left. I don't remember what was to the right, but I'll tell you why in a second. Seb and I went left and into the first doorway. It was a bedroom. A decently sized bedroom, but it didn't seem like the master bedroom. There was a double bed in there, and an antique-looking dresser. There were some old articles of clothing left behind in the dresser, nothing I wanted to touch. Seb left the room first, and then he said my name, in a very concerned, scared-sounding tone. I looked up at him, and he was looking down the hall. I stepped into the hall, and saw what he was looking at. There was that woman from earlier, standing in front of the bed in another bedroom at the end of the short hallway. She was still smiling like before. She opened her mouth and said, "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" My brother screamed, "Fuck you," and he pushed me to start running. We both made a beeline for the front door and sprinted to the outside. I couldn't help but look back at the house, at the upstairs windows, expecting her to be at one of them, but she wasn't. I also just had to make sure she wasn't chasing after us. We kept running until we were out of sight from the house, and then we kept running some more, even though my cardio sucked and I was out of breath. When we finally made it back to the car, I gagged, trying to throw up from exhaustion. We got in the car and Seb drove us home. The whole ride, we couldn't stop theorizing what it was that just happened. We said it might have been some loony woman off her meds or escaped from a mental facility or something. Maybe she was living in that abandoned house. But even explaining all of that away, the big question is, what did she have behind her back? And was she holding it that whole time she was walking behind us? So many questions that will never be answered. I've always loved thunderstorms ever since I was a kid, and so does my 6-year-old son. Anytime there's a storm, my son and I will sit in the backyard under the gazebo and just watch and listen. This was on a hot, stormy August night in Florida. As soon as we heard the first strike of lightning in the living room, my son jumped up and said, "Let's go sit outside." I followed him outside, where we ran from the back door to the gazebo, getting pretty wet on the way. It was already pouring. I have a nice setup under my backyard gazebo. It has a mini bar, a few wicker sofas, a TV, and mini fire pit. As we usually would, I turned on the fire pit and TV, and my son and I just laid back and relaxed, listening to the sound of the pouring rain and constant thunder. The thunder would get louder and louder as we sat out there, and the time between the flashes of lightning and cracks of thunder was getting shorter and shorter. The bulk of the storm was getting closer to us. The lightning was getting so bright and frequent that it was genuinely starting to light up the entire backyard anytime it flashed. And my backyard is big, with woods covering 2 edges of it. Perhaps after the biggest flash of lightning yet, my son squealed and pointed out towards the backyard. "What?" I said, to which he said he saw someone standing in the backyard. I stood up and walked to the edge of the gazebo. I couldn't see anything in the dark, so I was waiting for another flash of lightning. The next few flashes of lightning were too small to fully see into the yard, but when the next earth-rumbling flash of lightning struck, I saw what he meant. There was someone indeed standing out in my backyard by the woods. I told my son to go rush inside and turn on the backyard lights. He did so without question, and I stood in place waiting. About 10 seconds later, all of the backyard lights were on, but I didn't see the person way out in my backyard anymore. I waited for more lightning to maybe help see. But even with the lightning, I didn't see them anymore. They were gone. He, she, whatever, I didn't know. All I knew was that there was someone walking around my yard, and that didn't sit right with me. I went inside the house and locked all the doors, but kept the backyard lights on. I even turned on the front yard lights too. I didn't want to tell my wife, but my son had already done so anyway, so when she was all concerned and asking if we should phone the police, I lied to her and told her I saw the person out there leave. She asked if it was a man or woman, to which I replied woman, as it sounded less scary. For the rest of the night, the 3 of us watched a movie in the living room, with the storm still overhead. Eventually it was my son's bedtime, so my wife tucked him in and then came back to the living room, and we started watching something else. We still heard the thunder outside. Eventually I went back to the den to turn off the outside lights, front and backyard. When I went up to the living room, my son was standing at his bedroom door, scared, saying there's someone at his window. My wife and I looked at each other and yelled, "What?" I pulled him away from his doorway, and then I stood at the doorway, looking at the window, waiting for the lightning. When the lightning struck, no one was at his window, but I believed him. Someone was out there, that much was already established. I told my wife and child to stay inside while I go out and look, even though my wife didn't want me to do that. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and stormed out into the rain after turning all the lights back on. I started in the front of the house, then worked my way to the side, then the back. I looked under the tables, in the gazebo, under the deck, and when I thought the backyard was clear, the last side to check was the right side of the house. I would begin to walk towards the side of the house, and instantly saw a person in a hood, but I only saw half of their face and head. They were peering around the corner of the house. Most of their face and all of their body was hidden behind the wall. If I had to guess, I'd say it looked more like a man. I screamed, but I also ran in that direction with a bat raised up. The person disappeared behind the corner. When I made it past that corner, they were gone. Even with all the lights on, I didn't see anyone there. I went back inside and told the 2 of them that it was okay, that I chased the man away. But my wife did not like to hear that it was a man. I made sure to close all the blinds in the house now. Luckily, we weren't bothered again by that man. My son slept in our bed with us that night just because he was so scared, and I understand why. I didn't see it, but I can only imagine how scarring it was to see a man standing at his window at the young age of 6. The city in which I live almost never gets any rainfall, so when we do, it's a pretty exciting thing. The kids like to go out and play around, the farmers are thankful that their crops will thrive, and it's just a nice piece of scenery. The last time there was a big thunderstorm, my friends and I were all playing some game together, though I can't remember which one it was. I knew the thunderstorm was rolling in when everybody's microphone played the same sound of the first thunder, and it was big. When I heard it, I thought it was a gunshot or firework. Then I saw the lightning outside my window and hopped over to my bed to see the storm forming. What I saw was much more unsettling. Across the street from me was a man. He wore a gray hoodie and some jeans. He looked fairly tall, though not too muscular, and he was just standing there. I couldn't tell if he was looking at me or not, as his face was obscured. Then he started to walk down the street, so he wasn't looking at me. I felt relieved, yet still a bit paranoid. I got back on the game with my friends and we continued to play. About 15 minutes later, the storm had fully started. I told the 4 of them I was leaving to go watch the storm, and I'd be back in a while. I walked out front and stood under the porch, watching as the lightning flashed and the rain struck the ground in a soothing rhythm. Then I looked down the street to my left, and there he was, the man standing at the corner of the street. I was scared a bit, but I still had my head trying to reason this out. It's not uncommon for townspeople to stand out in the rain. It is a rare occurrence after all, so I paid little attention to it. After about 5 more minutes, I decided to go back inside. And as I opened the door, I turned to where the man had stood. He was gone now, which made for a more eerie scene. I walked inside, where 2 of my little siblings were dancing to a Bubble Guppies song. My other 2 siblings were in their rooms, doing who knows what. I went back to my room, but instead of playing the game again, I decided to go do something else. Though I didn't know what to do. Then I heard the all too familiar buzzing of my phone when I received a text. I picked it up and opened the messenger. It was an unknown number. They had sent me 2 texts. The first read, "Have you forgotten?" And the next read, "I know you didn't." My first thoughts were the man that I had seen outside, but then I thought of how slim those chances were. How would he have gotten my number? Why would he target me for whatever he was trying to do? I decided my friends were pulling a prank on me and decided to check. I went to the group chat and asked if anyone had been prank texting me. They all swore that they weren't, though it's hard to tell over text if they were lying. I decided to believe them and went to watch TV. Some time had passed, how long exactly I don't remember, when there came a ring at the door. It was way too late for visitors, so who could this be? Maybe the postal service? I checked the time on my phone, 12:19, definitely too late for visitors. I peered through my blinds in an effort to see who it was, but I couldn't. The rain was coming down so hard it was like a blanket of mist was everywhere. Then one of the gunshot thunders sounded. My head slammed into the window, making a thud sound. There was movement by the door. It was a person running off. I could only assume it was the man from earlier. No, I knew it was the man from earlier. How could these events not all add up? I wanted to call the cops, but I had no proof the man had been there. He just left without a trace. I decided to try and sleep and got about 3 hours worth, when a gunshot thunder woke me up. I shot up, then froze. Then I relaxed a little, when another loud bang sounded, but this one wasn't thunder. This one came from my window. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let whoever was out there know I was awake. But what if they knew? I decided to just take a peek through my blinds. What I saw next was probably the scariest thing I'd ever seen. It was the man with his hands pressed against the window, and I could only assume he was staring at me. The scariest part was his mouth. His eyes were mainly covered in shadow, but there was enough light to see his mouth, and it was smiling. It was such a big, maniacal smile I didn't even know was possible for a human to make. Then he stood and left. Just like that, he walked into the rainy night from which he came. I sat awake in my chair, but I guess I fell asleep somewhere along the road. When I woke, I was confused as to why I was in my chair. Then I remembered the previous night's events, and I darted to the window for whatever reason. When I pulled the blinds up, there was one thing I could see. A small piece of paper taped to my window. On it were 3 words that have now haunted my dreams. Have you forgotten? I haven't had any further experience with the man, and I hope I don't have to. It was a night I was working late. The weather outside was awful, and I was just leaving my job to go home. It was about 12 a.m. during a thunderstorm. I used to drive a 2005 Ford Fusion, a little car not ideal for crappy weather and roads. I was taking my usual route home, and the rain was so bad that even having the windshield wipers on the highest setting didn't help that much. I still could barely see. I was going 40 miles per hour on a 55 mile per hour road. That's how bad it was. There were no other cars around me. And when I least expected it, Through the water building up too quickly for my wipers to handle, thus partially blocking my view, I saw someone dressed in white running across the road from one side of the woods to the other. I saw them almost too late. I had to slam on the brakes and swerve to avoid hitting them. I swerved and lost control onto the grass before crashing head-on into a tree. The airbag deployed and my whole body jerked forward into it. I couldn't even believe what just happened at first. I was in shock. I knew immediately my car was totaled, but when I slowly started to accept what just happened, I started to look around my car for the person that just ran across the road randomly. I was currently in the middle of a quiet highway with no buildings nearby for miles and no cars to be seen. There should have been no one walking around here, especially in this weather this late. It was a work night and extremely late, so I was nervous nobody would pick up. The first person I called was my brother, who didn't pick up after several attempts. He was definitely asleep. I tried my sister next, with equal results. I didn't want to have to involve either of my parents in this, but with no other option, I called my dad on his house phone, which was sure to wake him up. He picked up on the last ring, and I explained the situation. I told him I'd need assistance, and didn't know what number to call for a tow. After ensuring that I was okay and that I had no injuries, he gave me the number for our family's roadside assistance company to call. He said he'd get dressed and drive over to me. His house was about 10 to 15 minutes away. My dad also told me to get out of the car to look for whoever was crossing the street and to keep my doors locked. When we hung up, I stayed in the car, nervously looking around every window, though not seeing much because of the pouring rain. I truly was so scared that I was about to piss my pants, knowing someone was out there, wondering if they intentionally ran in front of my car. I called our roadside assistance company, and they were sending a tow truck right away. About 10 minutes passed since the phone call with my dad now, and I texted my dad, "Are you on your way yet?" He texted back, "Yes." I had my hazards on, though I'm sure the car being ran into a tree would help enough in finding me. I turned to my right, as if I instinctively knew someone was there, and I jumped out of my seat and screamed at the top of my lungs as I felt like my heart dropped out of my body. There was a soaking wet man in white, looking into my car with his mouth hung open in an O shape and his eyes squinted. He then put his hands on the glass and started to rub the windows. I didn't know what he was doing, but I yelled at him to go away. He started to try opening the locked door, and when it wouldn't open, he started to pound his fists on the glass. He did all of this with his mouth still hanging open in that weird O shape. I didn't know what to do other than call my dad again. He picked up, and I basically cried into the phone that there was a random man trying to get into my car. My dad screamed into the phone not to open the doors, and that he's almost here. He stayed on the line with me as the man outside started to hit the window with his elbow, causing me to scream and my dad to panic into the phone. Surprisingly, the glass didn't shatter, and as if my prayers were answered, I saw headlights approaching from down the road and pull up behind my car. The man outside looked to the other car, which happened to be my dad's, and as my dad stepped out of his car and charged at this creep, the creep tried to run away into the woods, but my dad tackled him, and I swear beat his face in to the point that his face would have been completely covered in blood if it weren't for the heavy rain washing some of it away. He held the man down as I called the police. The tow truck driver arrived on scene first, and he was of course shocked at the unusual scenario he just pulled up to. Police showed up not long after that, and it was the most satisfying feeling seeing that man arrested. Not only was he charged criminally, but we pressed charges for the damages to my car. His name is Marcus Green. I never showed up to court. My father and our lawyer did. I didn't want to see that man ever again. The disturbing face he was making, along with seeing him striking my car to break in, is something that will stay with me for a long time. It was a rainy Thanksgiving. We have a small family, so our family gatherings are tiny. It was my mom, my two sisters, our grandparents, and I for dinner at my mom's house. My older sister Nancy has been moved out for years. My younger sister Jamie and I still live at home with our mom. Our grandparents live 20 minutes away. Our dad's side of the family all live in a different town. We were all helping out with cooking and such, and our grandma was bringing over some food as well. We always do Thanksgiving dinner at 6 o'clock sharp. Our grandparents arrived at like 5 o'clock. We had to go out and help them walk through the rain up the front stoop to make sure they didn't slip. It was really bad out. Once they were here,
We put the football game on in the living room, and I sat with my grandparents and watched football with my grandpa, who's a big Cowboys fan. My sisters were in the kitchen helping my mom with the food. The rainstorm created for a more comfortable and relaxing Thanksgiving evening. That is, at first. When it was time to set the table, I went to help. We were all at the table by 6 o'clock as per the usual. We had a giant selection of food for the small amount of people we were. Turkey, leg of lamb, potatoes, stuffing, corn, cranberry sauce, cornbread, and more food I'm probably forgetting. We were all at the table eating, drinking wine, and talking before we migrated to the living room, where there we all watched the football game. Then, sometime before the game ended, the doorbell rang. It was still pouring outside, and we weren't expecting anyone else. Our mom said, "Oh no, what if that's your father?" Long story short, our parents don't speak, but the idea of our father coming to surprise us wasn't impossible. My mom told me to go check who it was, so I went to the door and yelled through it, "Who is it?" But the sound of the pouring rain on the front awning drowned out the sound of a male's voice on the other side. So I opened the door, with the storm door still closed and locked. There was a black man on the other side of the door. He was in some really big rain jacket with the hood up. When I opened the door, he walked closer and yelled something through the door. I had to ask him to repeat it twice before I understood him to be asking for food, saying he's hungry. Then he said something along the lines of, "The Lord will give you good karma if you spare some food." I said 1 second. I went to the living room and told my mom there's a possible homeless or just very hungry man asking for food at the front door. My mom said close the door, while my grandma said give him some food. I said I'll make a little paper plate of food for him from the leftovers. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bunch of paper plates to account for the rain outside ruining them, and then sandwiched some of the leftovers together with them. Then I went to the front door where the guy was still standing. I held up the plate to show him, and he tried opening the door. I yelled, "Wait, it's locked." But I already was wary now after he tried opening the door. Regrettably, I still unlocked the door, and the second I started to push it open, he pulled it open with force and tried pushing his way through me. I instantly threw the food and held him back, yelling for my sisters to come help me. As Nancy came to help shut the door, I saw 2 more guys rushing up the front walkway to the door. I managed to push the man out enough to clear the door, and I helped my sister slam it shut. The second it was locked, I ran to the backyard door to make sure it was locked. I was the only able-bodied man in the house, and I felt like it was on me to protect the house. My family was in hysterics as we were brainstorming what to do. Not so shockingly, we settled for calling the police. My mom called while I kept going from window to window looking outside. It was hard to see out through the pouring rain, but through the backyard window, I saw a couple men running through the grass to the back door. I'd imagine they tried opening the back door and failed, and then I saw them running through the grass again back to the gate. Then they were gone. When the police got here, the food that I dropped onto the front stoop was still just sitting there, all scattered on the porch. Not that it wasn't obvious that those guys didn't come for the food, but it's something worth mentioning. Our Thanksgiving was almost turned into a complete nightmare if it weren't for my and my sister's quick reactions. I know my grandma had her heart in the right place, wanting to help the seemingly needy, and I was influenced by her. But unfortunately, we live in a world where sometimes trying to do the right thing could bite you in the ass. We installed the doorbell camera soon after this. It was Thanksgiving night. I was over at my parents' house for dinner since they were hosting this year. I got to see some cousins and uncles I hadn't seen in almost a year. We had a typical Thanksgiving gathering for our family. My parents cooked a big meal as usual. Before dinner, though, I got a long essay of a text from some unknown number. I won't share it because it contains a lot of personal, revealing details, but it started with, "Hey Melissa, hope your Thanksgiving is going well." Then I quickly came to realize who it was that sent this text. It was this crazy stalker guy named Kevin who I'd never even met before. We matched on a dating app and texted and snapped for a while, but we never met. He gave me obsessive vibes, and when I politely rejected going on a date with him, saying I don't think we have much in common, he got even more obsessive and aggressive. He even threatened me one time when I posted a snap story of my friend and I getting drinks, because he thought I was on a date with a guy.
That was when I blocked him on everything, Snapchat, Instagram, and his number. But the contacts didn't stop there. I'd get random Instagram accounts with 0 followers attempting to follow me, and I'd block them each time. Same thing on Snapchat, I'd get random accounts adding me with different guys' names every time. Whenever I'd add them back out of curiosity, their snap scores were always 0. After reading the entire message, I was disgusted. He was gaslighting me and borderline threatening me. I replied, "If you keep contacting me, I will go to the police." I took so long to form a reply I was okay with that my grandma got annoyed and asked me to put my phone away. It was only out of sight and out of mind for maybe half an hour before I got another text from another random number. It was another essay. I didn't want to completely ruin my mood and be on my phone dealing with this when I was with family. I put my phone away and just tried to focus on being a part of the conversation. When family started to leave and things started to slow down, I checked the text, and it was disturbing. It was longer than the first one, and it was him berating me and insulting me the entire time, acting like the entitled, narcissistic sociopath that he clearly is. When it was just a small amount of my family left, I showed them the texts, and they were appalled. My mom wanted me to go to the police the next day to report him for harassment, which I planned on doing. I soon left my parents' house to go home to my apartment. My apartment is the lower floor of a 2-family house. My friend Chelsea is my roommate in the apartment. I got home before her, and I went straight to my room to look for Christmas movies to watch. My phone started ringing, and it said unknown caller. I knew it was him. I denied it and silenced my phone. I put on some silly rom-com Christmas movie to fall asleep to. It was called Surviving Christmas. All I remember about it is that it had James Gandolfini in it. It was late at night, so I didn't plan on making it through the movie. I was getting sleepy halfway through the movie when I heard walking from outside my room in the house. It was in the apartment, not from upstairs, so I assumed it was Chelsea getting home from her night with her family. The footsteps came straight to my door, then someone attempted to open my door. I always lock my bedroom door at night, even though I trust Chelsea. It's just a natural habit I have. I paused the movie and listened as the doorknob turned a few more times. Before I yelled, "Chelsea?" Then it stopped. I heard quiet footsteps walking away from the door. I grabbed my phone, about to call Chelsea, and I saw a bunch of texts on my screen from a third random number. The most alarming one was a threat saying, "Good thing you made it obvious where you live." I tried calling Chelsea like 5 times, but she never picked up. I called my parents a bunch of times until my dad picked up. I whispered into the phone that I think that crazy stalker was in the house. My dad said to stay put. He was coming over right away. We lived 10 minutes away from each other, but he made it to me in 5. That's how fast he drove here. During that time, I stayed on the phone with my dad the whole time until Chelsea called me back. And that's when she told me that she wasn't coming back to the apartment tonight, so it for sure was not her. When my dad got here, the front door was locked. I had to let him in. I swore to him that I wasn't imagining what happened, and so after we tore the place upside down, he went to the big sliding window by the kitchen, big enough that anyone could fit through, and he lifted it open. He turned to me and gave me a stare of disappointment. He scolded me after learning that I didn't lock the windows every night, and said, "Here's my answer on how someone got in here." I went back home with him and slept at home that night. First thing in the morning, my dad took me to the county court's office where they gave us step-by-step instructions for getting a temporary restraining order. Skipping most of the legal process of this story, I eventually did see Kevin in person when I had to go to court to get the restraining order extended. The judge granted the extension, and though I could never prove he broke into my apartment, his threatening texts were plenty, and if he ever contacts me again through any outlets, he'd be arrested. This was a truly dangerous man, and I hope he hasn't found anyone else to harass. Most of my family lives in a rural part of Central Florida, closer to the East Coast though. My Uncle Ben was hosting Thanksgiving one year. His house sits on a huge lake with like 5 other houses, that's it. I don't want to give the name of the lake or the town because that would be doxing my uncle basically. It's not a fancy house and setup like you're picturing, trust me. It's rustic, but private and spacious. My uncle is a bit of a redneck,
but he makes our holiday gatherings more fun. Him hosting Thanksgiving this year meant that he'd be going all out, making it like a party basically, with music, cornhole, coolers full of beers, and all of that good stuff. We got to his house around 3. During the day, we all drank some beers, ate some snacks like chips and dip, and played drinking games together. Card games, cornhole, and even basketball with my cousin. Though the basketball didn't last long, with 3 beers and a bunch of chips in our stomachs. This all went on for a few hours with music blasting. An unusual way of celebrating Thanksgiving, I know. Then as it started getting darker around 5:30, Aunt Mel and Uncle Ben started bringing the food out to the table. They set the table up under the big gazebo. It was around sunset when everything was set up and we were all eating. The gazebo has lights, so when it got really dark, the lights turned on. By 6 o'clock, it was basically pitch black out. My uncle's probably the only one alive who insists on doing Thanksgiving dinner outside, but we all enjoy it. It makes it more fun. The fun soon ended though. My cousin suddenly pointed out past me to the woods, saying, "Dad, who's that?" Uncle Ben turned around and said, "Who the hell?" There was someone standing out in front of the woods like a statue, watching us eat. Uncle Ben stood up and started walking over to the guy standing by the woods, and then he yelled, "Can I help you with something?" I'd say he was about halfway to the woods when the guy turned around and ran into the woods. Uncle Ben turned around and laughed. He was definitely drunk by this point, finding humor in this. He said must be one of the local nuts as he came back to the table to sit. My Aunt Mel was not as amused, and I kind of agreed with her. That was creepy. My dad joked that between all the men here, there's nothing to worry about. The lightheartedness of this did not last though. This time I spotted the guy. He was standing by the woods again, though closer to the lake this time. I pointed it out to everyone. My uncle got up, pissed off this time. He started marching over again, yelling and taunting the guy. His drunkenness was really starting to show now, just in the way he was confronting the trespasser. But then we noticed there was another guy in the woods, on the complete opposite side of the yard. And when the one guy that Uncle Ben was approaching ran into the woods again, the other one stayed put. As Uncle Ben came back to the table, we said there's another one. So my cousin, myself, and my dad all got up now, ready to help my uncle confront these people. And with that, the second guy ran into the woods. By this point, we decided it was time to clean up. We started all cleaning the table and bringing plates and food inside to the kitchen. When everything was cleared out of the gazebo, we all sat inside the living room. Uncle Ben left the lights on outside, because I know he and Aunt Mel were on high alert with people running around their property being creeps. They didn't look like kids, that was the thing. And who would do this on Thanksgiving is the question. Our accepted theory was at the time that it was just some drunk older teens or young 20-year-olds with no family gatherings messing around being assholes. Eventually I wanted to grab another beer, which was in the cooler outside still. As I got up, Uncle Ben and my dad both asked me to grab one too. So I went outside and walked over to the gazebo. I made it to the cooler, suddenly feeling really uneasy. The gazebo light was off now. I looked around, analyzing my surroundings. I grabbed as many beers as I could hold, just so I wouldn't have to come back out here again. Then I started walking back to the house, when I heard one of the chairs under the gazebo sliding on the concrete. I turned around, and there was someone under the gazebo, walking around the table. He looked massively tall, like 6'5". I started yelling for Uncle Ben as I ran back to the house. He, along with my dad, came out, and I said there's a guy over there. And then, as if someone else was responding to me saying that, there was a banging from the other side of the house, like someone was hitting the siding with their hand. Seeing my uncle and my dad genuinely frightened made me frightened too. We went inside, and Uncle Ben locked the door. We didn't know how many people were outside of the house, but we felt like the house was surrounded. And Aunt Mel started shutting every last curtain and blind in the house because we felt like we were being watched from the outside. Uncle Ben called the police, which was a first. It felt completely out of character for him to involve the police in anything. He was only on the phone with them for like 5 to 10 minutes. Then we waited in the living room, with clear tensions and unease in the room.
There was this quick and sudden loud bang on the glass, followed by a window in the kitchen completely shattering. Aunt Mel yelled at Uncle Ben to go get the old rifle from the closet. He yelled back the thing hadn't been loaded in years. Luckily, the police response time was pretty good. A singular beep of the siren from the police car outside let us know he arrived. One of the people outside had thrown a brick through the window with a note attached to it, saying, "Leave now, you fucking faggots," which felt like a threat. His Trump flag was also missing the next day, which created the possibility of those people's motives being political. That's really the most realistic theory, because unless my aunt, uncle, and cousin are secretly the worst neighbors ever, I see no other reason why their house would be a target for something like this. On Thanksgiving, nonetheless. There really are some sickos out there.
This happened a couple weeks into the summer. I had just graduated high school, and it was my first and probably last summer without any real responsibilities, career or academic-wise. Everyone knows the beginning of the summer is the best time of the year, so it's safe to say that I was living my best life at that point. In Wyoming, there's this popular tradition where the new graduates drive way out into the plateaus and go rock climbing. Well, I'm not actually sure if it's a tradition anywhere besides my school, but I like to think it is. It's kind of a rite of passage thing, celebrating your freedom by doing something that requires a little skill and a lot of nerve. My friends and I have been talking about it for weeks, and we finally decided to make it happen. It felt like the perfect way to kick off what I hoped would be an unforgettable summer vacation. It was me, Alexandra, Nick, and Jack. We've all been friends since middle school, and Alex was the only one with a car reliable enough to make the drive. A Jeep that she was obsessed with and jumped at any excuse to take off-road. She was also the designated driver since she doesn't drink, which worked out perfectly for the rest of us who were planning to bring a few beers to celebrate once we reached the top of whatever plateau we decided to climb. Our plan was to check out the Flaming Gorge lookout first, then drive through the plateau area to find a good spot for climbing. The lookout was incredible. One of those views that makes you remember why you love living in Wyoming. After spending about an hour taking pictures and just soaking it in, we started heading back toward Route 80, taking our time and keeping an eye out for potential climbing spots. We were driving along Highway 141 when we spotted this really cool area off the side of the road. There were these massive rock formations that looked perfect for climbing. Not too technical, but challenging enough to be worth the effort. Alex pulled into a small gravel lot, and we grabbed our gear and filled our backpacks with drinks. The plateau we chose was maybe a 15-minute climb to the top. Nothing too crazy, just a steady scramble up the rock face with enough handholds and footholds to make it manageable. I have a bunch of pictures from that day, mostly because Alex insisted we get a million pictures of her, so I'll include some of them. Alex went first, since she was the most experienced climber among us, followed by me, then Nick, then Jack bringing up the rear. The view from the top was absolutely worth it. You could see for miles in every direction, just endless stretches of Wyoming wilderness. We cracked open our beers and were just sitting there enjoying the moment, talking about some of our other friends from school. I was just kind of staring into space, admiring the scenery, when I noticed a car speeding down the highway. It was a red pickup truck. To my surprise, after passing Alex's car, it screeched to a halt in the middle of the highway. I kept watching, and it actually started reversing, right there in the middle of the highway. I pointed it out to my friends, and the four of us got a little quieter, all wondering what the truck was doing. It reversed until it could turn into the lot we had parked in, which it did. We all watched as someone got out of the truck. From our distance, we could tell it was a man based on his height and build, but we couldn't make out much detail. At first, we thought maybe he was just another person looking for a place to climb or hike or just stop and rest. But then he started walking around Alex's Jeep in a way that just immediately seemed wrong. He was peering into the windows, trying the door handles, and generally inspecting the car like he was planning to break into it. That's when Nick yelled, "Hey," from the top of the plateau to announce our presence and let that guy know that the car was not unattended. We saw the guy jump a little and start looking around, clearly unsure where the voice had come from. Finally, he spotted us from atop the plateau, and he actually waved at us. That made us think it was over, that he'd probably get back in his truck, knowing that he couldn't get away with doing anything. To our surprise, though, he kept poking around Alex's car. In response to that, Jack yelled that we were armed, which I still think was a bad idea. We obviously didn't have any weapons with us, but I figured Jack thought the bluff might scare the guy off. Instead, the man looked up at us and yelled back something that made me freeze up. He said, "Me too, kiddo." Then he held something up in the air and waved it around, presumably a gun, but I couldn't tell from so far away. What happened next was like something out of a nightmare. The man started ramming his shoulder and elbow into the Jeep's windows, clearly trying to break in. We could hear the impact even from where we were sitting. Alex was furious and started screaming at him to get away from the car. The rest of us joined in, yelling and making as much noise as possible while we started scrambling down the plateau as quickly as we could safely manage. I've never climbed down anything so fast in my life. By the time we heard the sound of glass shattering, we'd made it to the ground and were sprinting across the lot toward the Jeep. The man saw us coming and yelled for us to stop, pointing what I can now tell was definitely a gun directly at us. We had no choice but to stop and put our hands up. The man told us to throw our phones and wallets on the ground, which we did without hesitation. Then he ordered us to walk backward while he collected our stuff, keeping the gun trained on us the entire time. I was close enough now to get a good look at his face. He was an older white guy, maybe in his 50s, with a scraggly beard and kind of weathered features. Nothing particularly distinctive, which was frustrating because I knew it would be impossible to identify him among a group of generic-looking white men. After collecting all of our belongings, he pulled out a knife and punctured one of Alex's tires. Then he walked back to his pickup truck, which I noticed didn't have any license plates, and drove off without another word. Alex was livid, and I don't blame her. I was mostly scared from being held at gunpoint, but if I were in her shoes, I'd be furious as well. Not only had this guy robbed us and damaged our car, but we couldn't even call the police or chase after him since he'd taken our phones and disabled the Jeep. Jack and I changed the tire as fast as possible, but I'm pretty sure all of us knew there was no way we'd be able to do it quick enough. Once we were back on the road, Alex drove as fast as she could in the direction the pickup had gone, but he was long gone. We gave up soon after that. Nick knew the way back to town by heart, so we decided to just head home and figure out what to do from there. As soon as we got to Alex's house, we used her mom's phone to call the police. We gave them a description of the man and his truck, but without license plates or any other identifying information, there wasn't much they could do except keep an eye out for someone matching the description. We never heard anything back from the police, obviously, and as far as I know, the guy was never caught. It completely ruined what should have been one of the best days of our summer, and I don't think any of us felt safe going out to remote areas like that for at least a few months. I definitely didn't. My name is Sophia. This happened 3 years ago when I was 19. My older brother Luke had just graduated from college in California, and the two of us were driving cross-country back home to New Jersey. Since he'd been living out there for 4 years, he had accumulated a whole apartment's worth of stuff. Furniture, electronics, books, everything, and there was no way he could fly back with all of it. But that wasn't the main reason we were doing it. I mean, cross-country road trip, sign me up for that any day of the week. I considered it a summer vacation, better even. We could have taken the direct route through Nevada and Colorado, but Luke wanted to see more of the country he'd been studying about, and I had never been to places like Zion or the Grand Canyon either, so we decided to take the scenic route along the southern edge. Luke insisted on renting a U-Haul instead of just shipping everything or selling it and starting fresh back home. Honestly, I think he was also trying to save money wherever he could, like a typical fresh college graduate. The U-Haul wasn't huge, but it was big enough that I felt like we were driving a small moving truck across the country. Before we left, both our parents and pretty much every travel forum we looked at had the same warning: be careful in New Mexico. It wasn't that the whole state was dangerous, but there were stories about scams targeting travelers, along with crime in some of the smaller towns and just generally sketchy situations in the more remote desert areas. Our dad specifically told us not to stop there unless we absolutely had to, and if we did, to stick to major gas stations and get back on the highway as quickly as possible. Luke and I agreed that we'd just drive straight through New Mexico without stopping. We'd fill up in Arizona, drive through as fast as possible, and stop again once we hit Texas. It seemed like a reasonable plan. The first part of the trip was amazing. Zion was incredible, and the Grand Canyon was everything I'd hoped it would be. Driving through Arizona was actually really beautiful in a way I hadn't expected, but somewhere in the remote stretch of New Mexico, our plan fell apart. The U-Haul was getting worse gas mileage than Luke had anticipated, and the gauge was dropping faster than we'd calculated. In hindsight, it was probably a little naive to assume we'd be able to make it through the whole state without stopping. We started looking for the next gas station along the highway, but according to our GPS, it was still about 40 miles away. The gauge was already below a quarter tank, and Luke was getting nervous about whether we'd make it. He pulled over to check the map, and that's when we realized we didn't really have a choice. There was a small town about 10 miles ahead that showed up on the GPS as having a gas station. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than risking running out of gas in the middle of the desert. The town was tiny, probably no more than a few hundred people, if that. It had that weird stillness that some small desert towns have, like everyone's inside hiding from the heat even though it wasn't particularly hot that day. There were a few rundown buildings, a small main street, and not much else. We didn't see any other travelers or cars passing through, which felt strange since we were still relatively close to a major highway. The gas station was one of those generic places with a few pumps and a small convenience store attached. As Luke was filling up the tank, I noticed we were getting some odd looks from the few locals who were around. Nothing aggressive, just lingering stares that made me uncomfortable. There was this guy leaning up against the convenience store smoking a cigarette who I kept catching eyes with, and I had to physically force myself not to look at him. I told myself it was probably just because we were obviously not from there, and we were driving a U-Haul with California plates, but nothing happened. After Luke finished fueling up, I tried to navigate us back to the highway. That should have been the simple part. We could literally see the highway from certain intersections in the town, but every road we took seemed to lead us further away from it. It was the strangest thing. We'd drive toward where we knew the highway was, and the road would curve or dead end or just take us in the completely wrong direction. It was like the entire town was literally designed to inconvenience us, as ridiculous as that sounds. And before you ask why we weren't using the GPS, well, we were, or at least we were trying to, but it wasn't helping. It was clear that Google hadn't updated that location in ages, because the map kept routing us to roads that didn't exist anymore, or were inaccessible entirely. And on top of all of that, the signal was practically non-existent out there, so it would go through cycles of brief connection followed by nothingness for minutes on end. We ended up driving around the same few blocks multiple times, and I was getting increasingly anxious. Luke was trying to stay calm, but I could tell he was frustrated too. It started feeling more and more unnatural, like there was something uninviting about that place that we were supposed to have stayed away from. I can't describe it, but that feeling of literally seeing the highway but never being able to actually reach it was just so bizarre and deeply unsettling. After another 20 minutes of driving in circles, Luke decided to go back to the gas station and just ask for directions the old-fashioned way. I begged him not to, but he practically yelled at me, saying we were literally trapped in the one place we were told to stay away from. I could tell he was pretty freaked out at that point, so I just kept my mouth shut. After returning to the gas station, he went inside while I waited in the van. When he came out, he had this worried expression on his face. He got in and said the guy working there had given him directions, but they seemed unnecessarily complicated. According to the clerk, we needed to drive 17 miles in the opposite direction from the highway through some desert back roads to eventually loop back to an on-ramp. I stared at him like he had lost his mind. In what world would we need to drive 17 miles in the wrong direction when we could see the highway from where we were sitting? I asked Luke what the guy was like, and he said he seemed friendly enough, but there was something off about how confident he was about the directions. like he was trying really hard to convince Luke that this roundabout route was the only way. Luke also mentioned that the clerk had been asking a lot of questions about where we were going and how long we would be traveling. Before I could even say it, Luke was like, "I don't trust it whatsoever. We need to get the hell out of here." He just started driving, and I didn't object. He eventually pulled over on a quiet side street to figure out what to do next. The GPS still wasn't functioning properly, and I felt myself beginning to hyperventilate. There was a little part of me that couldn't help but think something really terrible was about to happen. And then, as if on cue, a dusty pickup truck pulled up beside us. I felt my heart starting to race, and I looked over at Luke, who, from what I could tell, was already preparing to speed off should it come to that. The truck's window rolled down, and the guy asked Luke if we had broken down or were lost. Luke stared at the guy for a good few seconds before answering, clearly trying to gauge whether we were in danger or not. I sat there in the passenger seat trying to control my breathing. That's how freaked out I was. Had I been alone, I don't know what I would have done. After a tense few moments, Luke just said we were heading for the highway. He also described the route we were planning on taking to get there, which I realized were the directions the gas station clerk had given us. I didn't have the best view of the man from where I was sitting, but based on the tone of his voice, it sounded like he got really serious after hearing my brother speak. He asked us if we were crazy and said we should definitely not follow those directions. He went on to say that the route my brother had described would take us toward a really desolate area that was suspected to be a drug-running hotspot. Instead, he gave us alternate directions, then said it was a miracle we hadn't been robbed already, considering how clueless we were and how badly we stuck out, driving a U-Haul and all. Then, before we could even thank him, he drove off. Neither Luke or I said anything after that. Luke just started driving, following the man's directions. Sure enough, about a mile outside of town, there was this gravel road that was easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. It was the least intuitive, most convoluted highway entrance I'd ever seen, but after following the road for a good while, it did actually get us back onto the highway, and that was that. Luke and I talked a little bit about the whole thing, but I don't think either of us wanted to harp on it too much. We obviously laugh about it now, and our whole family knows the story and asks us to tell it every so often, but at the time, it was the most unsettling thing that's ever happened to us. I'll never forget that indescribable feeling of being there. It was like this mix of dread and anticipation and anxiety blended into one. My brother described it as a kind of breathless limbo, where you're not quite suffocating, but you can feel it coming. I never want to experience that again. This happened 5 years ago, 5 summers ago to be exact. My girlfriend at the time, let's just call her PS, had just graduated from college, with me having graduated a year earlier. We aren't together anymore, but there's no bad blood between us, and I don't regret a single bit of our relationship, even though it eventually fell apart. She was mixed, half Croatian and half Brazilian, and the two of us had always talked about going on a European trip together after finishing college. And if there's one thing you should know about PS, it's that if she put her mind to something, she was going to stop at nothing to see it through. Call it the Latin blood. That's always the joke I made. That's just how she was. So as soon as she graduated, the two of us started planning the summer vacation we had always fantasized about. There was one glaring issue though. We were both painfully broke, so we'd have to cheap it. The itinerary we ended up settling on was pretty ambitious for 2 people on a shoestring budget. We'd spend a week in Croatia, finishing up with 2 nights in Rijeka, which was PS's grandparents' hometown. She had never been there before, but she'd grown up hearing stories about it from her grandmother, and I could tell she was excited to see where her family came from. Because we were trying to save every possible cent, we couldn't afford any of the nice hotels or even decent hostels. Instead, we ended up booking the cheapest Airbnbs and travel lodges we could find on short notice. I'm talking about places with 1-star reviews and photos that looked like they were taken with a flip phone. But we didn't care. We were just happy to be going. Zagreb and Dubrovnik were incredible, even on our tight budget. The cities were packed with tourists, which made it easy to blend in and find cheap food and free activities. But Rijeka was different. It's a port city on the northern coast, and while it's technically on the water, it's not exactly what you'd call a beach destination.
More importantly, it definitely wasn't a popular tourist spot. Walking around, PS and I were clearly some of the only foreigners in the entire town. That should have been our first red flag, but honestly, we kind of loved it. PS speaks decent Croatian, not fluent, but enough to get by, and I was picking up bits and pieces as we went. We spent our first day just wandering around talking to locals, soaking up the authentic Croatian experience we couldn't get in the touristy cities. PS is one of those people who can strike up a conversation with anyone, and I'm pretty talkative myself, so we were having a blast just chatting with shopkeepers and random people on the street. Everyone seemed friendly enough, though I did notice we were getting some lingering stares. Not the usual curious looks you'd expect tourists to get. These felt different, like more intense, but PS didn't seem bothered by it, so I figured I was just being paranoid. On our second day, we decided to venture a little further from the city center to find somewhere authentic to eat lunch. PS had heard about this small restaurant area from someone at our Airbnb. Nothing fancy, just a local center that supposedly had amazing seafood restaurants. It was maybe a 15-minute walk from downtown through some residential streets that felt increasingly quiet as we got further from the main area. The restaurant itself was pretty nondescript, just a small building with a handful of tables inside and a simple handwritten menu taped to the window. But the moment we walked in, I knew PS had been right about the food. The smell was incredible, and you could tell everything was fresh and homemade. We sat down at a table near the window and ordered way too much food. Grilled fish, some kind of seafood pasta, bread, and a bottle of local wine that cost about €3. I remember thinking we'd struck gold finding this place. The food was absolutely fantastic, better than anything we'd had in the touristy restaurants, and it was costing us practically nothing. At one point, I noticed that while we'd been eating, a group of 5 men had come in and sat down just 2 tables away from us. They looked rough, the kind of guys you'd cross the street to avoid in any country, but they were just sitting there eating, not really paying attention to us as far as I could tell. I was actually kind of surprised I hadn't noticed them earlier. I figured I had just been too distracted by how good the food was or too consumed in the conversation I was having with my girlfriend. I didn't think much of it and went back to eating, but I remember finding it kind of annoying how loudly they were talking. We were about halfway through our meal, just talking and enjoying ourselves, when PS suddenly went quiet. She was looking past me toward the back of the restaurant, toward those guys, and I could tell something had shifted in her expression. Before I could ask her what was wrong, she leaned across the table and said very quietly that we needed to leave right now. I whispered back, asking what she was talking about, but she was already reaching for her purse. She said she was serious, and there was something in her voice that told me I'd better listen. I still didn't understand what was happening, but she's not the type to panic over nothing. She speaks the language. She knew the culture better than I did. If she said we needed to get out of there was probably a good reason. I pulled out a handful of kuna bills and threw them on the table, way more than our meal costs, and I followed her toward the door. The whole time I was expecting her to explain, but she just kept walking faster, practically pulling me along by the arm. It wasn't until we were outside that I finally demanded to know what was going on. She looked back toward the restaurant and said she'd heard those men talking. They were discussing what they were going to do to us, to her specifically. Her voice was shaking a little, which scared me more than anything else. She said she heard them say they'd separate us first, and some guy named Luca would know what to do, whoever that was. She said some other things that I don't want to repeat, but the message was crystal clear. We needed to get back to the main part of the town ASAP. I told her they might have been joking, but she shook her head and said they weren't talking about things they wanted to do, but things they were going to do. She told me she got the impression that what they were discussing was routine as opposed to fantasy. I believed her. That's when I made the mistake of looking back toward the restaurant. All 5 men were standing outside now, and they were definitely watching us, not even trying to be subtle about it. The moment they saw me looking, they started walking in our direction. I grabbed her hand and told her they were following us. Without another word, we both started running. Not jogging, not walking fast, full-on sprinting back toward the city center. The problem was, we were a lot further from downtown than I'd realized, and the streets between us and safety were mostly empty residential blocks. I could hear footsteps behind us, and when I glanced back, all 5 men were chasing us now. They weren't even pretending anymore. They were just straight up pursuing us through the streets. It was downright terrifying. PS was in better shape than me, but I somehow managed to keep up, probably because of adrenaline. We ran for what felt like forever, turning down random streets, hoping we were going in the right direction. Finally, after maybe 10 minutes of the most intense running of my life, we started seeing other people on the sidewalks and hearing traffic. The men stopped chasing us as soon as we hit the busy area. I looked back one more time and saw them just standing there, maybe 2 blocks behind us, watching us but not coming any closer. It was like they knew they couldn't do whatever they'd been planning once there were witnesses around. We were both completely out of breath and shaking from adrenaline. She was crying a little, though she was trying to hide it. I'd never seen her that scared before, and it made the whole thing feel even more real. We found a cafe in the main square and sat down, trying to process what had just happened. That's when this older Croatian guy at the table next to us, who must have overheard us talking in English, leaned over and asked if we were okay. When we explained what had happened, he just shook his head and called us idiots. Not in a mean way, but like he couldn't believe how naive we'd been. He said tourists shouldn't wander around alone in that part of the city, especially not obvious foreigners like us. Then PS described the restaurant we'd been to, and the guy's expression got even more serious. What he told us literally made me dizzy. He said we'd basically walked into a known hangout for local criminals, that the place was connected to some kind of organized crime group that operated in the area. He seemed genuinely concerned for us, like we'd narrowly avoided something really bad. I mentioned something about notifying local authorities, and he just laughed, but he didn't elaborate further. Then he paid for his coffee and promptly left the cafe. PS and I didn't linger much longer. We got up after catching our breath and headed straight back to our Airbnb. The rest of our trip was basically ruined. We were too spooked to leave our room except to grab food from places right in the city center. We spent our last day just sitting inside watching TV on my laptop and counting down the hours until our flight. Looking back, I'm incredibly grateful that PS had the presence of mind to get us out of there when she did. If she hadn't understood what those men were saying, or if she'd hesitated even a little bit, I don't know what would have happened to us. It's one of those experiences that makes you realize how quickly a normal day can turn into something genuinely dangerous, especially when you're in an unfamiliar place where you don't fully understand the local dynamics. I honestly still feel pretty stupid for being so casual in a foreign country. I know that's one of the most dangerous things you can do, especially if you look nothing like a local. We didn't talk much about the incident after we got home, but I know it affected both of us. PS had always been fearless about traveling and exploring new places, but I think that day in Rijeka changed something for her. Because it certainly did for me.